Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 5 creepiest graves ever discovered across the US, we return to the quiet edges of the world, where the hum of the living fades, and only the wind moves through the graves. These are the stories buried in stone and soil, tombs that whisper, monuments that bleed history, and resting places that refuse to rest. Every account you're about to hear is real, taken from those who've stood before these graves and felt the chill of something watching from below. My goal this month is to reach 4,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers wander in, listen, and vanish into the dark without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. We'll even test a viewpoint. 10 point. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's a grave or cemetery in your town that truly unsettles you, type its name below, because when the world sleeps and the soil settles, some things beneath it do not rest. Kill the lights. My name's Daniel Mercer. I'm from the south side of Albuquerque, and I work as a night security guard for a contracting company that gets rented out to whoever needs watches on sites, warehouses, and sometimes places that should just stay fenced off and quiet. And I need you to understand how normal this day started, because if I jump to what is making my hands shake right now, it is going to sound made up, and I swear to God it is not. So let me go from the start, from the part that still tasted like eggs and burned coffee instead of dirt and old air. I got up that morning a little after 8 because my shift was going to be one of those split things, a short afternoon briefing and then the real part through the night. I remember I had a breakfast burrito from the gas station down on Isleta, egg and potato with green chile that kept slipping out of the tortilla. And I was wearing the dark blue work shirt with the company patch that already had a faded grease stain on the left side where the seatbelt always rubs. The one my supervisor keeps telling me to replace, but never actually writes up. And I checked my phone when I got in the truck. It said 9:12. And the only reason I even remember that number is because later, the time started to matter a lot. Back then, it was just another number before another long stretch of being paid to walk around in circles and make sure no one hopped a fence. The job for that week was a site that sat right up against an old cemetery on the edge of town. Not the big one everyone knows near the freeway. This was a smaller one off a side road. Maybe you would miss it if you blinked. Just a chain-link fence, a rusted metal gate, a few cottonwood trees sagging over crooked white stones, and right next to it, on the other side of a temporary fence with a padlocked gate, was the dig. The archaeologists, as they called themselves. Truth is, I never knew if they were from the university or some private thing. They had that mix of dusty hats and expensive equipment I never touch. They called the place a historic burial site, not a cemetery, which always sounded strange to me because on my side of the fence, dead is dead. You put them in the ground. You mark the spot if you care enough. You mow around it. You keep the fence from falling over. They said this land used to be part of an older family plot before the city pushed out this way, and then it got cut off by property lines and roads and nobody claimed it. So now it became a project, something to dig up, measure, write numbers on. They had already been there 3 days when I got assigned, so the dirt piles were already high, and there was this one open rectangular cut in the ground, with plywood laid across part of it. When I first walked around with the day supervisor, listen, man, even then it just looked like a big hole with some boards and orange flags. Nothing special. My supervisor, Leo, walked me around the perimeter at about 3 in the afternoon. The sun was bright enough that the headstones on the cemetery side looked almost white. No shadows between them yet, just that buzzing heat and dry wind that kept moving the plastic flowers tied to the fence. Leo said, "All right, Danny, you got your usual. Walk the line, keep the gate locked, nobody in or out after the crew leaves. You note any vehicles that stop on the road. Call it in, if anyone gives you trouble. And you do not touch their toys. That is what he calls the equipment. Toys. Then he pointed at the open cut, the grave, as they called it. And he said, and seriously, do not fall in that thing. They will have us cleaning your mess out of there for a week. He laughed when he said it, and I laughed too. Not because it was funny, but because you always laugh when the supervisor does. That was around 3:40. My phone still had plenty of battery. The archaeologists were down in the hole then, at least 2 of them, maybe 3, bent over brushes and little tools. They had this crate set up with bones laid out on a cloth, long white pieces arranged in lines. And one of them, a woman with a bandana tied over her hair, was talking about axial something. Vertebrae, I do not know, she said to the guy next to her. These claw marks are deeper than the last coffin, and that sentence was the first thing that did not fit. I heard it as we walked by. Just a piece of conversation that stuck in my ear. And I remember thinking, claw marks, like a dog or something. But I did not ask. I just nodded when Leo finished his route, signed the sheet, and watched the day shift pack up. They left around 5. The sun still high but slipping, the sky that hard blue you get out here where you can see the mountains clear. The headstones on the other side of the fence were starting to cast thin shadows, all pointing the same way, and I settled in for what I thought would be the usual. Walk, check, locks, text my sister, maybe listen to a game on the radio, then count down until dawn. Listen, dude, I need you to understand that nothing jumped out of the ground. Nothing shook. Nothing dramatic happened in that first hour. It was quiet in that regular way. A truck passed on the road every 10, 15 minutes. A dog barked somewhere past the cemetery. The wind moved through the dried grass. And in between my rounds, I sat in my truck. Doors locked, radio low, logbook on my lap. I wrote 18-3, perimeter clear. No vehicles parked, all equipment accounted for. I ate a cold burrito I had brought for later, because I have no patience, and I wiped hot sauce off my fingers, on a napkin that already had pen marks on it. Nothing spooky about that, right? Just a guy sitting near some old graves making money by the hour. Then it started to go wrong in little pieces. That is the part that keeps looping in my head. The way it did not all come at once. The first thing was the sound, not the clicking yet. That came later. The first thing was this dull thump from the hole, like something heavy settling. I was on my second round. It was just after sunset. You know that time when everything is still kind of blue. Not dark, not light, and shadows start to stretch. I was walking along the temporary fence that separated the dig from the old cemetery fence. The chain link on one side, the plastic mesh and metal poles on mine, and the open grave was about 20 feet inside my line, still covered by that plywood they had dragged across part of it before leaving. And I heard it, a single thump from under the boards, not real loud, just enough to make the plywood flex a bit. You could hear the vibration. I stopped, turned my flashlight on, pointed it at the cut. The beam caught dust in the air and some tags on stakes. And for a second, I almost called out, which makes no sense. There was nobody there. I told myself the soil shifted, or the boards settled, or something. And I wrote it off, kept walking. I did not even put that in the log. I put 1912, exterior fence, secure, no incidents. I should have written it. I know that now. I circled around again, checked the padlock at the gate, kicked a stone out of the path, and walked along the cemetery side, close to the old fence, close enough to read some of the names if I had wanted to. I did not. I never really do. I have this thing about not reading names on stones. It feels like calling someone. I know that sounds strange. I just do not do it. But there was this one, a short stone right by a leaning metal cross. I caught a glimpse of the date as the flashlight passed, 2026, which is wrong because we are not there yet. We are in 2025, and my brain actually tripped over it. I swung the light back, ready to steady it, read it again, figure out that I saw it wrong, and it said 1926. 100 years earlier, just an old date, worn and chipped. I told myself, my eyes jumped. The 9 and the 0 blended in the beam, and I moved on. But my heart had already sped up once, just from that tiny thing, just from seeing a year that did not belong for half a second, and that was the leak starting, even if I did not know it yet. By full dark, the road had gone quiet. The sky over the cemetery was clear, no clouds, stars out, and the temperature dropped enough that I could see my breath a little when I walked past the dirt piles. It was probably around 21:30 when the second thing happened. The first phone call from the supervisor for the archaeologists. Something. I never got it right, but on the phone he just sounded tired. He said, "You? The security on site tonight?" I said yes, and he said, "You see any kids messing around out there? Anyone near the grave?" I told him I had not seen anyone, that it was quiet. He said, "All right. We had some tools go missing last night. Small things. Measuring tape. Calipers. I do not want any more walking away. Just log any vehicles." And that was it. He hung up fast. I wrote that call down. 21:34. Call from lead archaeologist about missing tools. Advised no activity observed. And then I sat back in the truck, and that is when the clicking started. Man, I remember the exact second because I had just checked my phone again. It said 21:41, and there was nothing on the road. Radio volume down low, some late talk show humming, and then under that, very faint, this slow, steady click, 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 like someone tapping two small rocks together, or teeth against something hard. It was not loud. Not at first. I turned the radio down all the way and held my breath. The clicking went on, a few seconds apart between each sound, coming from outside. I cracked the window. Cold air came in, and the clicking got a little clearer. It was not by the fence line. It was not by the gate. It was coming from the direction of the open grave. I got out of the truck with the flashlight and my keys and walked toward it. Each step in the gravel sounded too loud, like I was stepping into a place I should not go. The clicking kept going, one at a time, not in any pattern I could understand, not fast, just steady. I reached the temporary fence and shone the flashlight through. The beam hit the boards covering the grave, cut the dirt mounds, a couple of tarps flapping a little in the wind, and nothing else. The sound stopped. Just silence again. The plastic flowers against the old cemetery fence rattled as the wind pushed them. I said, "God, hello," in this stupid way, like a kid. My voice sounded thin against the open space. Nobody answered. I scanned the whole interior, checked for animal tracks by the bottom gap of the fence. Nothing. I stood there for a full minute, just listening, and there was only the wind and a distant dog and the hum of the streetlight at the corner of the road. So I told myself, maybe a piece of equipment shifted, or some loose metal tapped the boards. I tried to make a list in my head of what could click like that, and the only things I came up with were living things, teeth, claws, joints. I did not like that list, so I forced myself to walk the rest of the route and pretend it was all fine. The next few hours, I kept looping that space. Truck, fence, gate, truck. It was one of those nights that felt longer than it should have. I texted my sister around 23, just a dumb message about how I was stuck babysitting dirt and bones again. She sent a laughing emoji and went quiet. Probably fell asleep, I remember I tried to watch a video on my phone at around midnight, something to keep my eyes open, and the battery dropped faster than it should have, 3% gone in a couple minutes. The screen froze once when I tried to open the camera app to take a picture of the logbook. Then it caught up. I did not think too much about it right then, but later that freezing would matter. Around 1:15, the clicking came back, this time while I was mid-round. And it was closer. Louder. I was walking the inside of the site fence, checking the locks on the storage container where they kept their crates, and I heard it from behind me. Sharp, 3 quick clicks in a row. Like something impatient. I spun around. Flashlight up, beam hitting the open cut dead center. The boards over it were not lined up the way they had been. One of them was shifted sideways a little, leaving a darker rectangle of open space at one end, not wide enough for a person, but enough that you could see the drop, and in that slot of darkness, the beam only went down a couple of feet before it hit wood again. The interior of the coffin, I guess, and the surface of it had these lines carved into it, long, parallel grooves running across where a person would have been lying. I remember seeing the way the light caught on the rough edges of those grooves, and my brain filled in, fingers dragging, nails digging in, enough pressure to cut into wood from the inside. I backed up a step without meaning to. The clicking stopped again, and I got this urge to call Leo, wake him up, tell him something was wrong. But what was I supposed to say? The inside of their coffin looks like something tried to rip its way out, so I wrote it in the log instead. 1:19. Boards over primary excavation appear shifted. Interior wood shows heavy gouges. Possible prior damage from burial. Will inform crew in morning. The wording looks calm on paper. I was not calm. My pulse would not slow down. I went back to the truck and sat with the engine running, heater on, trying to tell myself I was being dramatic, that old coffins are bound to be damaged, that the boards could have shifted if the ground settled. Then I heard footsteps. Not the clicking. This was separate. This was actual boots on gravel coming from the road. I checked the mirrors, saw a figure walking along the edge of the cemetery fence, staying on the outside, not on my side. The person was moving slow, hands in the pockets of a heavy coat, hood up, head down. I stepped out of the truck and called, "Hey, you all right?" It was late. That road does not get many walkers at that time. The figure stopped right opposite the open gate of the cemetery. Not at my gate, the old rusted one for the graves, and turned their head toward me. I could not see a face under the hood at that distance, just darkness. They lifted one hand out of their pocket and made this small gesture with their fingers, like a wave, but slower. And then they turned and pushed the cemetery gate. The thing was supposed to be chained. I know because I checked it back when there was still some light. The chain had been looped, but the padlock was just hanging through it, not actually closed. The gate opened partway with a squeal. The person stepped through among the headstones and moved between them. The shadows took them fast. I called again. "You cannot be in there this late." But my voice died out in that space. No answer, no movement. I thought about going after them, but the cemetery was not my property. My area stopped at the temporary fence. My job description did not say chase strangers into graves. So I wrote it down. 1:36. One individual observed, entering old cemetery through main gate. Hooded. Did not approach site fence. Lost visual among headstones. I told myself if they started messing around or trying to hop the line, I would call it in. Until then, they were just someone visiting a grave at a bad hour. Maybe they worked late. Maybe they were grieving. I tried to leave it at that. Only the clicking had come from my side, from the open grave. And I did not want to think about the timing. I did not want to think about someone walking into a place for the dead right after something in the ground made that impatient sound. Man, I am getting ahead of myself. The middle part is where it all started stacking. I need to tell you about the morning before, because that is when the second skeleton came out, and that is the part that still wakes me up when I do sleep. This was not my first night on the site, it was the third. The first 2 nights were boring. I almost missed them now, but the day crew had been talking more each shift. Louder. They had pulled 1 full coffin out on day 2. All the bones in place. Everything the way they expected. They cleaned them, measured them, laid them out on that cloth in neat lines. The main guy showed me once as I walked by. He said, "See this? Classic adult skeleton. See the wear on the teeth. Probably a manual laborer." He was almost proud. I nodded and said something like, "Looks real old." And he said, "Well, that is the idea." Then on day 3, the morning of the night I am telling you about, the mood changed. When I showed up for the afternoon briefing, they were not laughing, they were whispering. The woman with the bandana had dirt on her knees and gloves, still on, even though she was sitting on the cooler. She looked up when I came through the gate with Leo and said, "Hey, can you sign this?" They needed a log for who came on site. My name went under a list of theirs. Doctor, whatever, Maria, Tom. And then down below, a new name, Marcus. Someone who had joined them that day. I saw the line through his name, a neat single line, and a note in parentheses. Left early. I did not think about that much at the time. Leo walked me to the edge of the cut and said, "They want us to keep a closer eye tonight. Someone has been moving their stuff." Then he crouched down, lifted the edge of the tarp they had pulled over, part of the excavation, and said, "And they got themselves a story?" I stepped closer and looked down. This was before they put the boards back. The grave was open. The coffin was open inside it. They had propped the lid off to one side, and inside, on top of the old wood, were bones, not just one set, 2. The first set was laid where you would expect. The long bones lined up, the ribs arched, the skull at one end. The second set was crouched, if that is the right word, curled along the side of the first, pressed against it in a way that did not match anything I had seen in movies or pictures. The limbs were too long, the spine was too bent, too many vertebrae stacked in a tight curve. The jaw bones were narrow but stretched. The finger bones, if that is what they were long and thin, and some of them dug into the interior of the coffin wood, leaving those grooves they kept talking about. I remember saying, "That is messed up." The bandana woman came over then. She said, "We think the second one was placed in there later. Whoever buried this did not want it found." Her voice had this tight edge, like she had not stopped thinking about it since they uncovered it. I asked, "Animal?" and she shook her head. "No, not the way these joints are. Not with this hand structure." And the main guy, doctor, tired voice, said, "We are not jumping to any conclusions. We need proper analysis." But there were photos taken. Lots of them. They kept talking about curvature, ratio, articulation, words that sounded clinical over something that made my skin pull tight. At one point I asked, "Where did the second one come from?" And Maria, the bandana woman, said, "That is the thing. There was no record of a second burial here, and the coffin was not big enough for 2 normal adults. So either someone opened this back up and shoved something in, or..." And she stopped, looked at me like she had said too much, then changed it to, "Or centuries of movement made everything shift." She did not sound like she believed her own second option. They covered the grave with plywood and tarps after that. She believed a grave with own said, and they makes about face 4 D native few chairs, more carefully than before. Like they did not want any dirt or light to touch what they had seen. Like they wanted to press a lid back onto something that did not want it. They were supposed to secure everything, catalog, and then leave by 6. That was the plan. A normal plan, only Marcus did not sign out. His name was there with the line through it, and that note left early. But when I asked Leo about it later, just between us, he said there was some mix-up. The guy went home sick. That is it. And yet nobody saw him walk past my gate. And my log from that afternoon did not show any vehicle leaving early. I checked it twice. It bothered me in this small way. I kept pushing down, like a pebble in your shoe you ignore until you cannot anymore. Okay, listen. The night I am talking to you about, the one with the clicking, and the hooded person, and the boards moving. That was the night after the second skeleton came out. The night after they took all those photos and then told me to watch the site extra close, as if they expected someone to break in and steal bones. Nobody I know risks jail for old bones, and yet they talked like it was a real risk. Around 2 in the morning, when the clicking had stopped for a while and the road was empty, a truck pulled up that I did not recognize. An older pickup, dark color, dented door. It slowed by the cemetery gate, idled for a second, then pulled into the little dirt shoulder between the main road and my fence. I got out, shining my light, hand up, ready to tell someone they could not park inside the no parking area. The driver rolled the window down. Older man, gray hair pulled back, deep lines in his face from the sun. He wore a faded jacket with patches I did not recognize. He looked past me, over my shoulder, to the dig site and the open grave area. Even though he should not have been able to see much from that angle, he said, "They opened it." Did they? His voice was calm. Too calm for the question. I said, "I do not know what you are talking about, sir. This is a closed site." He nodded, eyes still not really on me, and said, "The one that buries the lost with itself. That one, they opened it." Then he looked right at me for the first time. And I swear to God, his eyes were not angry or scared. They were just sad, tired in a way I did not have a word for. He said, "You tell them to fill it back in before sunrise, before the ground remembers it is empty." Then he put the truck in gear and drove away. No more explanation. No asking to go in, nothing. I stood there with my mouth open, logbook under one arm, my free hand holding the flashlight that suddenly felt too small. By the time my brain caught up and I thought, I should get his license plate, his taillights were just 2 small red dots down the road. I went back to the truck and wrote in the log, 2, 3, older male in pickup stopped on shoulder. Advised he could not enter. Stated, quote, "Tell them to fill it back in before sunrise." End quote. Vehicle departed. I read that line 3 times before I turned the page. It did not look real. It looked like something I made up to scare myself. I considered calling the archaeologist guy again, waking him up, telling him some stranger knew about their grave. But I did not want to be that guard, the one who calls about every weird person and noise. So instead I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes for just a second, just long enough to feel the weight in my chest and hear the quiet. When I opened them again, the clock on the dash said 3:10. I had not meant to sleep, even for a minute. That is the part that bothers me the most. I am careful about that, especially on open sites. But I had 30 full minutes missing, and in that half hour, everything moved. The first thing I noticed was the cold. The temperature felt wrong for that time, like I had stepped into a different part of the night. My breath came out in thicker clouds. The truck felt like it had been sitting with the engine off for hours instead of half an hour. Even though the key was still in the accessory position, the radio dead. I tried to turn it on, nothing. I checked my phone. The The battery had dropped to 9%, way lower than it had been. And there were 3 new notifications from the camera app, each one saying, "Cannot save footage," "Storage unavailable," "I had not opened the camera," "Not on purpose." I got out of the truck, my heart already pounding, and the first thing I saw was the gate to the temporary fence standing open. The padlock still looped through the chain, but the chain was unwrapped, hanging loose. The gate swung a little in the wind, metal lightly tapping metal. I know I locked that gate. I do it by muscle memory. Chain through twice, padlock through the last link, snap shut, tug, check, every round. I know. I went cold from the inside out. When I saw it open, I walked over slow, shining the flashlight ahead, calling, "Hey, site is closed. You cannot be here." No answer. The beam of light moved over footprints in the dirt, more than mine. Small partial impressions, some going toward the pit, some coming back. But they overlapped so much I could not count them. It was like someone had paced back and forth over the same line. I followed them in, every instinct telling me to wait for backup. But what was I supposed to do? Stand there and let whoever it was walk around? I reached the edge of the grave and stopped, so suddenly the gravel slid under my boots, and I had to plant my feet to keep from tipping forward. The boards were gone, not shifted. Gone, stacked neatly to one side of the cut, all in a row. Folded. In the rectangular space where the coffin had been, there was just darkness. Deeper than it should have been. The sides of the cut were still there, with markings and little flags, but the bottom was empty. No coffin. No bones. No measuring sticks. Nothing. Just a rectangle of shadow that my flashlight beam seemed to hit and then stop, like it was foggy down there, or full of dust I could not see. I said out loud, "That is not possible," which is a stupid thing to say, because the ground does not answer you. Expecting to see the wood, the nails, those gouge marks, the curve of the first skeleton's ribs, the longer outline of the second. There was nothing. I could see earth at the very bottom, pale and compact, but no sign anything had ever been there. The walls of the cut did not even show where the coffin would have dug in as it was lowered. I knew what I had seen when it was open earlier. I knew how tight that fit was, how little space there had been between wood and dirt, and now the sides were smooth, like someone had cut the whole thing with a giant knife. I backed up again, almost tripping on a bucket, and I felt this pressure between my shoulders, like someone watching from behind. I turned fast. Flashlight swung out. The beam swept across the site and hit the fence line where the cemetery started. I saw the old headstones, the trees, and between 2 of the stones, a shape, standing just beyond the fence, not on my side, tall, thin, still, its head at the same level as the top of the fence, which did not completely make sense. The ground dipped there. "It should have been lower," I called. I took a step toward the fence, light still on it, and in the space of that one step, the shape was gone, not moved, not stepped behind something, just gone. The beam hit the empty gap between stones. I told myself my eyes were messing with me, the way shadows between stones and trees can line up. You know, but my hands were shaking now. I could feel my pulse in my neck. Listen, dude, this is where my memory starts to slip in places. I remember sounds more than images. I remember the clicking coming back, not from the grave now, but from the space around me, closer, like it was circling. The clicks bounced off the equipment, the storage container, the fence posts. Never from the same spot twice. I turned in a slow circle, flashlight trying to find a source. Nothing, just those small, sharp sounds, sometimes a pair close together, sometimes one alone. I called out again, louder. I said, "This is private property. If you are in here, you need to come out now." My voice cracked on the last word. I hate that it did that. I sounded young, scared. There was no answer, only the clicking. And under it, something else. I do not know how else to say it without sounding dramatic, but I am just telling you what I heard. I pulled my radio up to my mouth, then finally, and called dispatch. I said, "This is Mercer, on-site off Old Coors. I have a possible intruder and possible tampering with the excavation, requesting backup unit." The radio hissed for a second. Then the dispatcher answered. Calm. "Like always," she said. "Copy that. Mercer, nearest unit is 22 minutes out. Can you secure your position?" 22 minutes. Felt like someone telling me to stand in a doorway during a storm and hold the door shut with my hands. I said, "I will stay by the gate. Do not disconnect. Just stay on with me." She said she had other lines, but she would check back in every few. Standard stuff. I started backing toward the gate, keeping my light toward the open grave. My feet wanted to turn me around and run, but I did not want to put my back fully to it. About halfway to the gate, maybe 30 feet from the pit, I heard one more click, louder and closer, and then a voice. From inside the cut, not from the bottom, from the side, like someone was standing on a ledge that should not be there. The voice said, my name, not my last name, not the one on my patch, my full name, the way my mother says it when she is mad, Daniel Adam, and the voice sounded like her at first. Same tone, same rhythm. I know that sounds like the part where you stop believing me, but I need you to follow this. I froze. Every muscle in me did. My throat closed. The flashlight beam shook so hard, the circle of light on the ground danced. The voice said, "Come here, I want to see you." And the way the words came out, the circle of light 9, it was like they had been practiced by someone who had heard her talk a lot, but did not fully understand how to shape them. There was this extra edge on the vowels, too firm, too slow. I forced myself to say, "Mom, is that you?" It felt ridiculous. Even as I said it, my mother was at home on her couch watching her shows. Not down a hole by an abandoned cemetery at 3 in the morning. The voice answered, "Yes, honey. I fell. Can you help me?" Only she never calls me honey, not in years. That word stuck out more than anything. It was wrong. It was like hearing a song. You know, with one note changed, my foot hit something behind me. The gatepost. I had made it that far without realizing it. I said into the radio, "There is a voice. I think someone is trapped. Send fire. Send someone." And the dispatcher said, "What kind of voice?" But she sounded farther away, like the radio was losing signal. I kept my eyes on the cut, on that rectangle of darkness. And then, slowly, something pale moved along the inside wall, just below the surface. Sliding, a hint of fingers, too long, pressing into the earth, but not leaving marks. Feeling for an edge. The clicking started again, faster now, like teeth against bone. I could not move. All I could think was that the coffin had been there hours ago, and now the ground was smooth, and whatever had been pressed against that wood from the inside had more room now, more space to stretch. The voice tried another tack. It said, "Danny, man, it is Tom. I think I broke my leg." And now it sounded like the younger archaeologist, the one who always joked with the crew, the one who called me bro, even though we were the same age. The pitch was close, but the words came out in a heavy way, like someone pushing them through mud. I knew Tom was at home too, and even if he was not, he would not be in a grave without a truck or car outside. I said, "You are not him. Whatever you are not him." My teeth were chattering so hard by then. I bit my tongue. I tasted blood. I wiped it away with the back of my hand. And the feeling of that, the wet on my skin, made everything snap for me. Some stubborn part of me woke up. I hit the floodlight switch by the gate, the one that lights the whole site when they are working late. The bulb sputtered for half a second and then blasted the place with white light, sudden and harsh. Everything went from deep shadows to flat brightness. And in that instant, the clicking stopped. There was no one in the grave. No pale thing on the wall. The dirt sides looked normal again, the bottom still empty. I could see every small stone and bit of root. There was nowhere for anyone to stand and hide. Nowhere for an arm to slide along the side without leaving a mark. My radio crackled. The dispatcher's voice came through clear. She said, "Mercer, repeat your last. You cut out," I said. "Never mind the voice, just send the unit. There has been tampering with the excavation." And I went to the gate, closed it, wrapped the chain through twice, clicked the padlock shut, and this time I did not look back until I heard the backup unit pull up, the red and blue lights flashing across the stones of the old cemetery, making the names and dates leap out and disappear as they rolled. The other guard, Eddie, stepped out, rubbing his eyes. He said, "What did you drag me out here for?" Man, I walked him through what I could without sounding insane. I showed him the log with the times, the notes about the boards, the missing coffin. His face went from annoyed to tight and quiet. He said, "You sure nobody came through here? No vehicles? No kids?" I pointed at the shoulder, where the truck had been, the little marks where its tires had cut into the dirt, already starting to lose their edges from the cold. I said, "Only the one old guy." And he did not get out. Nobody else. We both walked back to the grave together, him with his light, me with mine, the floodlights still on overhead, making everything too visible. The cut looked the same as when I had seen it minutes before. Empty. Smooth. Wrong. Eddie said, "Maybe they moved everything and forgot to tell you." I said, "You know they would not do that. They log every piece. They are proud of those bones, and they would not carry a full coffin up a ladder at quitting time and not complain about it." He could not argue with that. He just shook his head and said, "Well, it is not here now, and you do not get paid enough for this nonsense." We both laughed a little then, not because anything was funny, but because we needed some sound that was not clicking or that voice. He stayed the rest of the shift with me. We took turns sitting in the truck and walking the line. Nothing else happened. No more sounds, no shapes at the fence, no strangers on the road. When the sun started to push up behind the hills, turning the sky light blue, the site looked normal again, in that way that makes you wonder if you imagined the whole thing. At 7, the archaeologists started showing up. Cars, one by one. Coffee in hand, jackets pulled tight. They looked tired, but not in the way I felt. They were just early morning, tired. They went straight to the grave when we let them in. I watched from near the gate as the main guy stopped short at the edge, his shoulders stiffening. Maria came up beside him, then Tom. They all stared down at the empty cut. There was a long silence, and even from where I was I could feel it, like the air between them had gone thick. Finally, the main guy turned and walked over to me, his face pale. He said, "Did you move our coffin?" His voice was flat. No accusation yet, just shock. I said, "No, sir, I did not touch it. You know I am not allowed." He looked past me at Eddie, who backed me up, said, "We both saw it empty at around 3. It was like that when I got here." The archaeologist rubbed his forehead, fingers shaking a little. He muttered something about vandalism, about how someone was going to lose funding. All these words that sounded big and bureaucratic, but his eyes kept going back to the hole, like he expected something to climb out. Maria came up close enough that only I could hear her. She said, "Did you hear anything from it?" Her question was too specific, too pointed, like she had been waiting for that scenario. I thought about lying, saying no, because admitting the voice and the clicking would make it more real. But she had that look that said she maybe already knew the answer. So I said, "I heard something. I heard noises that sounded like tapping, and maybe a voice. I am not sure." She closed her eyes for a second, nodded, and said, "You should go home and sleep, Daniel. You look like you are about to fall over." And the way she used my full name made me flinch. I had not told her my middle name. I had not told any of them. I checked my patch to make sure it had my first and last only. Like always, it did. I asked, "Did you talk to a guy from the Pueblo, older, gray hair, pickup truck?" She froze, then slowly shook her head. No, then yes, then said, "We spoke to someone before we started the dig, weeks ago. He told us there were stories about this place, that the ground here did not like to give things back, but we thought he meant we would find less than we hoped. Not," she gestured at the empty cut, "not this." I told her what the old man said, his exact words, about filling it back in before sunrise. She went a little gray around the mouth. The main guy called everyone over then. Round about, said they were pausing the excavation, that they needed to report a theft or disturbance, that nobody was to talk about it outside the team. You could feel the fear in that order. The way he tried to hide it made it worse. I signed out at 8, handed the log over, told them they could call the company if they needed the notes copied. My shift was officially over. I could have gone straight home, straight to bed, but instead I got in my truck and drove, not to my place, not to the company office. I drove to the big cemetery near the freeway, the one with the wide lanes and the newer graves. I do not even know why. Maybe I was trying to prove to myself that this was just one strange sight, that other places for the dead behaved. I parked by the fence, engine off, and just sat there, looking at the rows of stones, the morning sun making long shadows, cars passing on the freeway behind me. Normal city noise. My hands started to shake, then in a way they had not while I was on the job. Now that I was alone and off the clock, the reality of what I had seen and heard was coming in. I tried to picture some rational explanation, like the coffin being pulled out by a crane I somehow slept through, or someone playing recordings through a speaker to mess with me. But every version I ran through fell apart on the details. The missing time, the open gate with the lock still in the chain, the way the dirt looked like it had never held anything, the way the voice shifted from my mother to Tom and used words they do not use. I sat there until my phone buzzed. It was a text from Leo. It said, "Call me when you wake up. We need to talk about last night's report." That was hours later. I had not told him yet, but they had already called the company, complaining or asking questions. I did not answer. I put the phone face down on the dashboard and stared at the fence in front of me, and this thought formed in my head so clear, it might as well have been someone else saying it. If the ground can decide what it keeps and what it gives back, if it can let one thing out and hold another, what else can it change without anyone agreeing? I'm not saying Bones got up and walked away. I am not saying anything climbed out. I never saw that. All I know is that one night there were 2 sets of remains laid out in a wooden box with claw marks on the inside, and the next night there was only the shape of a hole that did not fit what had been there, and a voice from the dark that knew names it should not. Since that shift, I cannot drive past any cemetery, big or small, without feeling the weight of all that dirt pressed over all those boxes and bags and cloths, all those names carved in stone. I change routes now, even if it takes me 20 extra minutes. I go around, I avoid streets that run alongside fences with headstones behind them. When I cannot avoid it, I turn the radio up and stare straight ahead. I will not look at the dates. I will not read the names. I keep my eyes on the road and my hands tight on the wheel. I told the company I will not take any more posts near graveyards or memorial parks. They laughed at first. Said, "What? The big tough night guard is scared of a few rocks and flowers?" I did not laugh back. I told them they could fire me if they wanted, but I was done with burial sites. They shifted my schedule around after that. I got warehouses and storage lots, places with concrete and shelves and forklifts. And I should feel better, but I do not. Not really, because dirt is still under all of it. And sometimes, late in my shift, around that same time, the clicking started that night. I will hear a small sound in the quiet, something tapping. Not metal, not plastic, and I will freeze, waiting, listening to see if it repeats. I tell myself it is just pipes, or a rat, or a pallet shifting. Something normal. And most of the time it probably is. But once in a while the sound has that same rhythm, that same deliberate space between each tap, like something counting. I am telling you this sitting in my truck right now, in another lot, nowhere near a fence or a stone. It is 3-2 inches the morning. My phone screen is cracked from when I dropped it the day after the site closed. My battery is at 14%, and I have not slept right since that night. Every dream I do manage to slip into ends the same way. I am standing at the edge of that cut in the ground, looking down at nothing, and something just out of sight below my feet is clicking its teeth together, waiting for me to lean a little closer so it can try another voice on me. One I trust. I know how this sounds. I know you can try to line it up with stress and sleep debt and imagination. You can say, I nodded off and dreamed that half hour and the crew just moved their coffin. But the archaeologists never found it again. Not in the storage, not on any camera. Nobody filed paperwork about relocating it. I heard that from Eddie, a lugger from a Debaloo, ad in 1-4, who still does jobs near that site sometimes. He says the ground there keeps settling in a way it should not. Cracks showing up around that cut even after they filled it back in, even after they poured gravel. Sometimes you can cover something over and pretend it was never opened, but the earth remembers. That is what the old man in the truck meant, I think. And if the ground there once held something that did not belong, something that curled itself around another set of bones and dug its way into the wood to hold on, then there is a place under that city, under all of us, where not everything buried is human, and not everything that shares a grave is resting. I will not walk past cemeteries anymore. I will not even park near them unless I have no other choice. And if some crew ever asks me to watch another dig near old stones, I will hand the keys back and tell them to find someone who has not heard their own name coming up out of a grave that was supposed to be empty. My name's Daniel Mercer. I'm from a little place called Briar Ford, up in upstate New York, and I work as the maintenance guy for a brick church with a white bell tower and the graveyard that wraps around it. And I am sitting in my car at the gate right now at 3 in the morning, watching my breath fog up because the heater cuts out if I let the engine idle too low, and this battery is not going to survive another winter. And I am talking into a cracked phone screen because I cannot walk in there again without saying this out loud to somebody first. Man, I swear to God, I need you to listen to me for a minute. Just listen, because I am not making any of this up and I know how it sounds. I know how it sounds. Today started normal. That is the part that keeps looping in my head. How boring it was at first. How boring and small. I woke up a little after 6 because the radiators in my apartment bang when the heat kicks on. And I remember I had the last 2 slices of leftover pizza from last night for breakfast. Cold, standing at the counter in my work pants, the dark green ones with the knee patches, and I got a grease stain right above my left pocket that is still there right now. I can feel it when I run my thumb over it. Little stiff circle that the washer did nothing for. I put on my gray church sweatshirt with the logo half peeled off from the dryer, and my steel-toe boots with the soles starting to separate at the front. And I checked the time on my phone, 6:42, same as always, because I have to be at the church by 7 to unlock the side door for the preschool parents that use the basement classrooms. I drove the same road I always drive, county route that winds behind the hardware store, past the diner that smells like bacon, even if you are just driving by with the windows up. And then the road dips a little and you can see the bell tower over the trees, the cross at the top catching the first light. The cemetery sits behind the church and spills down a little slope, stones packed tight around 3 sides of the building, like the church grew up out of the dead instead of the other way around. I have walked those rows so many times. I could draw the path of every crooked headstone, from memory. Man, I could tell you where the ground softens, where the old maple roots push the stones sideways, where the veterans' flags go in May. Everything. I pulled into my usual spot by the shed. Same coffee in the same travel mug, 2 sugars. Powdered creamer. Checked my phone again. 6:58. And I remember thinking, alright, another Tuesday. Try not to forget to order more ice melt this week before it gets too cold. That was it. That is how it started. The first wrong thing did not even hit me as wrong at first. It was maybe 9, after I had salted the front steps and changed 2 flickering bulbs in the hallway, when Pastor Harris came out the back door calling my name from the top of the little ramp that leads down toward the graves, his voice carrying in that way it does when the air is cold and still. He had his long coat on, and that knit scarf his wife made him last Christmas, and he was frowning in that pinched way. That means he needs something but does not want to sound demanding. "Dan, can you come down here a second?" he said. And I remember I wiped my hands on my pants like I had been doing anything but just standing there by the shed pretending to reorganize rakes. I walked down the gravel path with that crunch under my boots, that sound I can hear in my head even now. And he was standing at the end of one of the older rows near the little stone wall that separates us from the woods. The grass there is patchy, lots of moss, and the stones are thin and leaning. Names worn half smooth. "You remember the Whitcomb plot?" he asked me, pointing with his gloved hand at a rectangle of slightly raised ground near the corner of the wall. I looked at it and I remember blinking because my brain knew something before I did. There was just empty grass, no headstone. Bare spot where something should be. "Yeah," I said, slow, because I could see it in my memory as clear as if it was still there. That stone, short and wide, with a little carved border and the name Marvin Whitcomb in block letters and the dates chiseled shallow, 1959 to 2019, not that long ago. I mowed around that stone every week in the summer. I had to trim the edges because the mower deck never got close enough. I was there when they buried him. I hauled folding chairs for his graveside service. "You moved it for something?" the pastor asked. And his voice had this tightness underneath the polite tone. "No," I told him, and I felt this little cold line travel up my back under the sweatshirt. "I did not move anything down here." He looked at me for a second, then back at the grass, and he sighed and said maybe he was remembering wrong. Maybe it was another row, and he moved off to check, and I just stood there staring at that bare patch, the way the grass dipped like there used to be something heavy there pressing down. I kept telling myself I was mistaken, that there was some other Whitcomb stone, some other part of the yard. But my feet knew this spot. They knew the little dip in the ground where my right boot always slid a bit when I pushed the mower. I knelt and ran my hand over the grass, like touching it would make the stone pop back into being. And my fingers brushed over something hard, like the edge of rock. But when I pushed the grass aside, there was nothing there. Just dirt. A couple of pebbles. Some dry brown roots. "Dan," the pastor called a minute later. It must have been in the next section. And I said something like, "Must be." But my voice came out thin. The thing is, it did not seem terrifying. Not then. Just off. Like when you walk into your kitchen and a chair is not where you left it and you cannot remember moving it. You shrug it off. but a little part of your brain keeps poking at it. I went back to my other work. I fixed a sticky lock on the nursery door. I carried down boxes of artificial wreaths from the attic. I ate lunch at the little table in the boiler room. Ham sandwich with too much mustard because the bottle slipped. And I scrolled through my phone and forgot about the missing stone for maybe 20 minutes. Then the pastor came down again, more upset this time. "We need the Whitcomb grave today," he said. "His sister is visiting. She wants to see it." I put my sandwich down and wiped my hands and followed him back out. The air hit colder the second I stepped around the corner of the church toward that back section, like I had walked into the shadow of a storm cloud that was not there. I could see my breath in front of my face, even though the sun was bright and I was sweating under the sweatshirt just a minute before in the boiler room. The pastor stopped halfway down the path and rubbed his hands together, saying how it felt like November back here. And I pulled my phone from my pocket to check the temperature, because that is what you do. Right, you look at the little number like that means anything. It said 46. The weather app said it felt like 44. Back by the shed, it had felt like low 50s when I checked earlier. I walked those last few steps with my teeth starting to chatter, and I swear to God I could feel the change, like a line drawn across the grass. When I got level with where the Whitcomb stone should have been, the cold came up from the ground, through my boots, like standing on a block of ice buried under the sod. The air itself felt thick and cold, and there was a ring of frost just around that bare patch, tiny crystals on the grass blades, even though everything else was damp and dark green. "This is where it was," the pastor said, his voice small, like he knew he was asking me if reality was still there where he left it. "You remember the inscription, right? He used to say he would take everything with him when he died. You remember that? That is why they put that line on there, about taking it all along." And it hit me that he was right, that the bottom of the stone had that extra line in smaller letters. "Here I take it all with me," and we had all kind of smiled about it when the stone came in from the engraver. I nodded and said, "Yeah, this is the spot." He just stood there for a moment, then took a slow step back, like the cold had pushed him. "Maybe the ground shifted," he said. "Maybe it fell," but the words did not sound like he believed them. After he left, I could not stop thinking about it. The next few days, little things started to go missing around that patch. I am not talking about people's jewelry or something dramatic. I mean the small stuff that makes a place feel solid. On Wednesday, I left my rake leaning against the tree that stands 3 graves over from the Whitcomb plot when I went in to use the bathroom. When I came back out, there were fresh tracks in the dew from my boots, and the rake was gone. I looked by the shed, the front steps, the ramp, every place I might have absent-mindedly carried it, but it was not there. I finally found it laid down flat, teeth pointing toward that same bare patch of ground, half buried in leaves right at the edge of it, like someone had gently set it down and then pushed it a little into the dirt. On Thursday, one of the little solar lights a family had put by their mother's grave vanished. Those things are always crooked or dead, so I noticed when that corner looked darker. The plastic stake had been sunk deep. I remembered because I helped the son shove it in with his boot, and he complained about how rocky the soil was. There was just an empty little round hole now, filled with dry, crumbly dirt, no light in sight. On Friday, 2 of the fake flower arrangements that had been wired to metal stands along the row were simply not there anymore. The wires were still twisted around the stands, hanging loose, like something had slipped the flowers right out of them without straightening the metal. I asked around. I really did. I asked the pastor if any families had come by to clean up grave decorations. He said no. I asked the volunteers who sometimes help on weekends if they had moved things, if maybe they had taken stuff inside for winter. They all shook their heads. "Maybe kids," one of them said. But his eyes slid toward that back section when he said it, and he did not sound convinced. I started testing it, like an idiot, like a kid messing with a socket after getting shocked once because he needs to be sure. On Saturday afternoon, after the funeral for Mrs. Larkin, I took one of the metal folding chairs from the tent and set it right at the edge of that cold patch, front legs almost touching the frost-dark circle only I seemed to notice. I told myself I was doing inventory, that I just happened to leave it there. But my heart was beating fast, and I checked my phone every couple of minutes to see the time. 3:12, 3:16, 3:19. I walked back inside to help stack hymnals, left it maybe 10 minutes. When I came back out, that chair was gone. There were my footprints and the pastor's from earlier, and nothing else, just that bare patch of ground and the grass slightly pressed like something heavy had been there. Like when you move a couch and there is that rectangle in the carpet. I found the chair maybe 2 hours later. It had sunk. That is the only way I can say it. It was down in the dirt at an angle in the dip that marked Whitcomb's grave. The legs swallowed up to the middle, like it had been slowly lowered into wet concrete that then hardened around it. Only the backrest and part of the seat were visible. I tugged on it with both hands and it did not budge. The metal was ice cold, colder than metal should feel in 40-degree weather. My palm stuck to it for a second, like the time in elementary school when a kid put his tongue on the metal railing in January. I had to peel my fingers away. That is when I stopped thinking it was just some weird sinkhole or prank. Something was wrong with that ground. He promised to take everything with him, Pastor Harris said. The next morning when I showed him the chair, my voice shaking harder than the metal, he stood there, scarf flapping a little in the breeze that did not seem half as cold as the air over the grave, and he said it like a joke that did not land. He always said that, all through chemo, all those visits. Said he was not leaving anything behind for the state or his ex-wife or anyone. I am taking it all with me, Pastor. That is what he used to say. He tried to laugh, but it came out wrong, thin and high. Then his face went serious again and he told me to call the grounds committee about a potential sinkhole, have them send someone to look. The storm hit first. Upstate weather is strange. You get these sudden systems that roll in off the lake or the mountains and dump on you out of nowhere. This one had been on the radar for a couple of days. Big blue and green swirl on my phone screen with little lightning symbols skittering around. Sunday night, it started spitting rain after the evening service. Nothing serious, just that cold drizzle that makes your sleeves heavy. I live about 10 minutes from the church, like I said, and from my bedroom window I can see the faint outline of the bell tower when the sky is clear, like a darker shape against the dark. That night I sat watching it while the rain came down louder and louder, white noise against the glass, and every now and then the whole sky would flash and I would count the seconds before the rumble to see how close it was. Old habit. I checked my phone one last time. 12:37. Plugged it in, tried to sleep, kept seeing that chair half eaten by the ground when I closed my eyes. I do not know what woke me. Could have been the thunder or the way the wind was pushing at the building, making the old pipes groan. All I know is I opened my eyes and the room was blinking with light from outside, the kind that makes everything look flat and shadowless for a second. I looked over at the tower through the rain-smeared window and I could not see it. Not even its outline. It was like the church had sunk or the world had shifted. There should have been that darker rectangle against the sky, but it was just black and gray and the moving smear of water. My chest started going tight. I grabbed my phone from the charger. It was 2:58. There was this feeling in my gut like I had forgotten something important, like when you wake up and know you are supposed to be somewhere, but you cannot remember where. I threw on my boots and that same gray sweatshirt from the morning, still damp around the cuffs from the drizzle earlier, and I drove. The roads were slick, wipers not quite keeping up, that thudding sound on high speed. Every time the sky flashed, I saw the narrow strip of asphalt ahead of me, swimming in water and leaves. When I turned the last curve before the church, my headlights swung across the cemetery gate, the 2 stone pillars, with the iron arch between them. Just this slow, heavy pulsing, like the earth was breathing. The rain made it hard to see. Maybe that is why I thought I was imagining it at first. But every time lightning lit everything up, The rows of stones in that back section seemed to rise and fall a fraction of an inch, in time with some rhythm I could feel in my teeth. I pulled into the gravel lot, and the car fishtailed a little, tires slipping in the mud. I killed the engine, and for a second the silence was louder than the rain had been. Just the ticking of the hot motor and the hiss of water on metal. Then I heard it. Under everything else. This deep, slow sound. Not quite a growl. Not quite thunder. The only thing I can compare it to is when you put your ear against someone's chest and listen to their heartbeat and the way their breath moves through them. It was like that, but wide, all around me, coming from the ground behind that gate. I know I should have stayed in the car. I know that. And I had this picture in my head of the whole hillside collapsing, taking half the graves with it, caskets and stones tumbling. And I thought if I saw it starting, I could call somebody, do something. So I grabbed the flashlight from under my seat and I went in. The second I stepped past the pillars, the temperature dropped like I had walked into a freezer. My lungs hurt. My fingers went numb around the flashlight handle. The beam shook on the path, bouncing off the wet gravel and the darker shapes of stones. The wind that had been thrashing the trees outside the fence died down to nothing in there. I could still hear it in the high branches beyond the wall, but inside the cemetery it was weirdly still, rain coming down straight instead of slanting. Every breath came out in a cloud. I walked toward the back, my boots squelching in the soft ground, and with every step, that pulsing got more obvious. Not just sound now, but motion under my feet, the push and give, like standing on a big mattress that someone is very gently pressing from underneath. When I reached the row where the Whitcomb grave was, I stopped. There was a pool of water collected in that bare patch now, dark and glossy, like the rain refused to soak in there. The grass around it was plastered flat, and the frost was gone, replaced by this slick, almost oily sheen. The metal chair was gone entirely. That, more than anything, made my head spin. I had to grab a stone nearby, one of those old thin ones, to keep my balance. The whole area felt like it was humming, a low vibration running up my legs. I swung the flashlight beam around to see if maybe the chair had been pushed out, thrown somewhere. The light caught on something pale at the edge of the water. For a second I thought it was bone, that color, but it was stone. Just the very top curve of a headstone, like the top of an arch, just visible under the surface, as if something had chewed its way up from below. The water over it was not clear. It was muddy and full of floating bits of grass, but I could see enough. I do not know how long I stood there staring before I realized my lips were moving, saying no over and over. This was where the Whitcomb stone had been. Now there was another stone under it. That is what my brain decided, like the original had gone down and something else had taken its place from underneath. I did not feel any of it. My whole focus was on that pale curve. The pulsing under my hands, pressed into the ground, was slower now, but deeper, like it was settling. "You promised to take it all," I heard myself say, and I had no idea why I said it, except that the pastor's voice in my memory had put that sentence there earlier. My fingers slid into the water. It was so cold it burned, like ice water from a mountain stream. I could not see my own hand once it went under, just this darker shape. But then it bumped stone. There, a flat surface, slick with mud. I ran my fingers along the top of it until I found the edge, then the front where the inscription would be. The pulsing stopped. Everything went quiet for a second. Even the rain. I could hear my heart in my ears. I wiped at the stone with my hand, trying to clear a little window in the mud. The flashlight beam bounced on the water and threw weird shadows up the nearest headstones. Little by little, the carved letters appeared beneath my fingers. At first, they were just grooves. Then they made sense. Marvin Whitcomb. Same name as before. Same shallow block letters. Below that, the dates. I whispered them as I read them, just to make them real. 1959. That was the birth year. I remembered that already. The death year had been 2019. I remember that too. I remember looking at it while mowing, thinking how recent it was. Under my hand, in the mud-rippled water, the last 4 numbers were not 2019. They were this year. This year. And the day, the month and day, were not the one I remembered either. They were the next day. Not the day he died 3 years ago. Tomorrow. I yanked my hand back, like I had touched a live wire. I fell backward onto the wet grass, the flashlight rolling away and skittering light over the stones. The pulsing came back all at once, harder now, enough to jostle the water in the pool so it lapped at the muddy edges. I scrambled on hands and knees to grab the light, my breath coming in these short little gasps that did not feel like they were doing anything. I shone it back at the stone, blinking rain and mud out of my eyes, but the water had gone more opaque, churned up by whatever movement was underneath. I could still just make out the carved line at the bottom, the one I remember from the original stone. Here I take it all with me, but the dates were lost in the murk. I got up and I ran. I did not care about slipping or falling. I ran along the rows, bumping shoulders on stones, muttering sorry to the dark, because that is what years of working there does to you. By the time I got back to the gate, my lungs were burning. The temperature jumped back up the second I stepped through, like walking out of a freezer into a warm room. The wind hit me in the face again. Real wind this time, full of rain and leaves. I sat in my car with my hands locked around the steering wheel for I do not know how long, watching the wipers smear water back and forth while the bell tower loomed out of the darkness every time lightning flashed, perfectly where it should be, like it had never gone anywhere. I checked my phone. 3, 7. There were no missed calls, no messages, nothing on the local alerts about sinkholes or gas leaks or any of the things I was trying to tell myself could explain what I just felt. I thought about calling the pastor right then. But what would I say? That his graveyard was breathing and changing dates on stones. I drove home on autopilot. I sat on the edge of my bed in my wet clothes, staring at the floor until the outlines of my boots blurred and sharpened over and over. Around 7, my alarm went off like it was a normal day. I turned it off and kept sitting. When my phone buzzed at 8, it was a text from Pastor Harris, asking if I could come in a little early. There had been a call from the funeral home about a sudden passing. They might need to schedule an extra service this week. He was one of ours, the text said. You know him. I will tell you when you get here. I did not go. I am in the parking lot right now instead, watching the gate. I got as far as the turn off the main road before my hands started shaking so bad I could not keep the car straight. I pulled in, put it in park, and for a few minutes I just watched my breath fog the windshield. I finally turned the engine back on long enough to clear it. I can see back through the bars. The grass looks normal from here. I cannot see the back row, just the nearer stones. The ones by the path. Cars go by every couple of minutes on the road out front, tires hissing in the leftover wet. This is the part where I am supposed to tell you that I went back there and checked again, that I proved to myself the date was what I thought it was, that it said tomorrow in clear carved numbers, but I am not going to pretend I am that brave. I know what I felt under my hand. I know the deep part of my brain that tracks days and months and seasons recognized those numbers even through the blur and the mud. I also know that when the pastor finally called me after I did not respond to the text, his voice sounded older, and he told me that one of the Whitcomb relatives had passed in his sleep last night, in the nursing home on the other side of town. Isn't that something? The pastor said, not waiting for an answer. Same family, same plot. Life has such symmetry sometimes. I almost told him not to bury the man there. The words got as far as my tongue. Then I pictured that patch of ground taking the chair, the rake, the flowers, the light, the headstone itself, and I could not make any sound at all. I hung up instead. I have been here since. I ate a candy bar from the gas station across the road for dinner. Wrapper is still in the cup holder. I have turned the key on and off so many times trying to decide whether to leave that the battery is making that lazy sound now. Each crank slower than the last. The clock on the dash says 3:19. My phone says the same. In less than 24 hours, someone else is going into that ground. Maybe by the time you ever hear this, they will already be there, tucked down into the same earth that swallowed that stone and everything around it. I keep thinking about that line, "Here I take it all with me." And the way the pastor said he promised that, over and over, through all his treatments, through all his paperwork and visits and sermons. I keep thinking about the way the temperature drops over that patch, like the world is thinner there, like something is pulling heat and objects and maybe time itself straight down. I cannot prove any of this. There are no photos, because my hands were too numb to think to pull my phone out when I felt those numbers under my fingers. If I go back now and look, maybe the water will just show an old date again, the one that fits the records, and I will have to decide whether that means it changed or I imagined everything. That is almost worse, so I am telling you instead. You, whoever you are, listening to a stranger in a car, at a cemetery gate, in a town you probably could not find on a map, talking too fast, and then stopping in the middle of sentences because his mind keeps jumping back to the feeling of stone under freezing water. I used to cut through graveyards all the time to save a few minutes, you know that. When I was a kid, we would ride our bikes between the rows, and the older ladies would scold us, and I would laugh and hop the little stone wall and take the back alley home. Even working here for years, it stopped meaning anything. The way the names blurred and the dates just became numbers I mowed around. Now I cannot even look straight at the headstones nearest the gate without my throat tightening. I drive the long way around town if I have to pass the other cemetery out by the highway. I turned down my cousin's request to be a pallbearer last month because the idea of walking that close to a fresh grave made my vision go white at the edges. I cross the street if I see even a row of little memorial plaques in front of a civic building. I turn the radio up when the car windows reflect so I do not accidentally see a line of stones sliding past in the glass. I know the world is going to keep doing what it is doing. People will keep dying. Families will keep ordering stones with loving inscriptions and little jokes and promises they do not understand. The ground back there is going to take what it wants, whether anyone believes me or not. Maybe it was always like this, and I just finally noticed. Maybe it is new. Some slow change that started when he went in the ground. I do not know. What I do know is that there is a grave behind this church that does not behave like the rest, and a headstone down in the dirt with a date that is not supposed to be possible, and a promise carved into stone that feels less like a joke every time I think about how many little things have already disappeared around it. I am not asking you to fix it. I do not even know what that would look like. I just need someone else to carry a piece of it, so it is not all in my head. Maybe next time you walk past a cemetery on your way home from work, or cut through one to save a few steps, you will feel the ground a little more under your shoes. Maybe you will glance at a stone you have walked by 100 times and really read the dates, the words at the bottom, and if something feels off, if the air feels 20 degrees colder and your breath suddenly shows white in front of your face when the weather app says it should not, because I am telling you, man, I will not step through that gate once this recording is done. I am going to turn this key one more time and hope this battery has enough left in it to get me to the next town. And from now on, I will take the long way around any place with headstones, any bell tower with graves pressed up against the walls. I would rather be late every day for the rest of my life than feel that ground breathing under my feet again. My name's Darren Cole. I'm from Briar Ford, Tennessee, and I work as a cemetery groundskeeper. And right now it is a little after 3 in the morning, and I am sitting in my car at the gate of the same place I am about to tell you about. And I am shaking so bad that the key is rattling in the ignition, and the battery light has been 45 now, coming on and off all week. So if this thing dies on me while I am parked next to these stones, I am just going to stay right here until the sun comes up. I am not walking that driveway again in the dark. I am telling you that now. Listen, I am not trying to be dramatic. I am tired. My eyes burn. And I just need to say this out loud one time. so it is not just sitting in my head when I close my eyes. So you can believe me or not, but I am going to tell you exactly what happened. The way it happened, from the start, before anything was wrong. Before that time on the clock meant anything to me. Back when a grave was just a job and not a thing breathing under your boots. That first day was nothing special. That is the thing that keeps bothering me. If there really was something off in the world, like people say, it would be on some weird day. Some date that sticks out, but it was a Wednesday. And I only remember that because I had sausage and eggs that morning instead of cereal. And I do that midweek when I know I have a long shift. I was wearing my gray work pants with the little rip on the left knee, and it bothered me for 3 years. And I never asked them to fix it because I told myself it was not worth the trouble. I clocked in at 7:02. I remember seeing that on the little digital thing next to the office door. And I walked my usual loop, checked the trash cans, checked if any flowers had blown over in the storm the night before, picked up 2 beer cans some kids had left by the back fence. Nothing big, just the usual. The way you do when you work around the dead and it starts feeling like lawn care more than anything else. The cemetery is not big. Man, people hear cemetery and they think rows that go on forever. This is maybe 3 acres if you count the slope up the back where the older stones lean. There is a short brick church on one side with a white bell tower that has not rung in years. The pastor plays a recording on a speaker now. On the other side there is a line of pines and then a cow pasture, and up front is the little office in the shed with the mowers and shovels and gas cans. Our driveway curves past the front rows and up toward the older part. And if you stand by the gate at night, you can see the town lights off in the distance, but they never really reach the stones. They stop before the fence, like the light does not want to come any closer. That Wednesday, we had a burial scheduled for late afternoon. A man from town, nothing out of the ordinary. So my morning was just trimming around stones, checking the plots, making sure the path up the hill was clear. And the first time I saw that grave, it did not mean a thing to me. It was just a patch of ground that sat wrong with my eyes for half a second. And then I moved on, because the trimmer line broke. And that was what I cared about right then. That and the fact that my back was still sore from moving 2 big headstones the day before. I was up in the oldest section, the part people joke about when they come up for decoration day. The stones up there are thin and tilted. Some with names and dates worn down so far, you just see a faint shadow of letters, like the rock is trying to forget who was under it. And then beyond those, there is a corner where there are no stones at all. Just a rectangle of ground that is a little more sunk in than the rest. And that is where it started. I did not know it then. I just noticed the dirt looked a little puffed up in the middle, not like a fresh dig, just like someone had pressed up from under it one time and then everything settled back wrong. It was maybe 10 in the morning. The sun was bright and the grass was still wet from the storm. My boots were soaked already. There was a little fog still hanging close to the ground between the stones, and I was just trimming, watching for rocks so I did not break another line. And I looked down and thought, that patch looks weird. Higher in the middle, like a blister. And I stepped on it with my heel, just a little bit, and it did not feel soft. It felt firm, too firm for the way the ground was. And I remember thinking maybe a root pushed up from one of the big trees. And then I got a call on the radio from the office about moving a vase, and I walked off and did not think about it again for hours. The day went on normal. We had the burial at 4. The family cried. The pastor did his thing. I set aside the extra dirt, put down the little green mat for the flowers. All routine. And by 6 we were locking up the office, and most days I go home then. But we had storm damage in the back half. A big branch had come down near the fence line. And the director asked if I would stay a little late and at least drag it to the pile, so we did not have a big limb laying where people drive through. I said sure, because I can use the hours, and anyway, being up there in the evening never bothered me. You get used to it. When you spend that much time around stones, the dead stay where they are. That is what I always told myself. So I was up in the back around 7:30, sky going orange, the church long empty. No cars on the road out front. I had the small cart with me, and I had just finished tying up the branch when I heard this sound, like dirt shifting, not loud, just this small, dry crumble sound, and I looked over, and it was that same unmarked patch, that little rectangle with no stone, and I swear to you, I swear to God, the dirt in the middle of it rose up maybe an inch, like something under it pushed and then settled again. I stood there with the rope in my hands, and my first thought was armadillo or some animal. We get them sometimes. Digging under the fence. And I almost laughed at myself for flinching. I walked over and stomped the ground again, a little harder, and it felt solid under my boot, like a packed grave that has been there 50 years. No give at all. And I remember looking around for holes, for any sign something had been digging from the side, but the grass all around was even. Just that middle part looked wrong, like someone had slapped a hand under a sheet and pulled it back. I told myself it was nothing. I really did. I even said out loud, "It is just ground settling, dude. Relax." And I went back to the branch, finished dragging it down toward the pile by the shed, and I kept trying to listen for that sound again. But all I heard was the wind hitting the plastic flowers and the little clicking noise they make, and a crow up in one of the pines. And by 8:30 I was in the office, setting the alarm, thinking about dinner. That night at home I checked my phone and saw the time I texted my sister that I was leaving. It said 8:21, and I only remember that now because later that number started sitting next to another one in my head, but right then it meant nothing. I ate leftover spaghetti, watched one of those game shows, and fell asleep in the chair. No nightmare. The next day I did not even go up to the back section until afternoon because I had 2 graves to trim near the front and a delivery of concrete liners to help unload just regular stuff. And then the same thing, I got up there near that patch, and I swear, same sound, same little dry crumble, like fingers pushing through dirt. And now the sun was lower, because I was later. The shadows from the pines stretched longer over that corner, and when I turned my head, I saw it happen. Not out of the corner of my eye, not imagined. I watched the soil hump up right in the middle, slow, then drop again. I walked straight over, heart going hard, and I tapped my boot around the edges. Nothing, no hole, no softness, that same hard-packed feel. And that is when I noticed something else. There was a little ring in the dirt where it had lifted, like the way flour looks if you push up under it. A faint line. And inside that circle, the soil was darker and a little damp, like it had just been turned from underneath. And all around it, the ground was dry. I told the director about it that afternoon when we were in the office. I said something like, "Hey, you ever noticed that old unmarked plot up on the hill? The one without a stone?" And he made this face and said, "Which one?" And I started to explain. And then old man Rigsby, the part-time guy who comes in to do paperwork and sit in the office during funerals, he looked up from his crossword and said, "You mean the preacher?" And right away, I wished I had kept my mouth shut. I asked what he meant, and he said he thought that corner was where they put that traveling preacher years back. And then one Sunday he came inside to shout, and he dropped right there in the aisle, dead with his eyes open. And because nobody knew what to do with him, and he had no family in town, the church let the cemetery bury him up in the back with the old ones. No proper stone, just a wooden cross that rotted away years ago. This is just town talk. Man, I do not know if any of that is true. That is just how they tell it. But the part that stuck in my head was what he said next. That people claimed his last words were about how nobody could shut him up and anyone who tried would feel his breath for as long as they lived. The director rolled his eyes at him, told him not to fill my head with nonsense, said ground settles. And that was that. We went back to talking about water bills and flower policies, but my hands were already a little sweaty on the pen, and I could feel that patch in the back of my mind like something watching the conversation. That night I was on the late shift again, not to work but to lock up after a visitation that went long. The family did not leave until close to 10. We have these little solar lights along the main path, but they barely touch the back. I was standing by the office door, waiting for them to finish hugging and crying, and when they finally drove out, I locked up, set the alarm, and something in me said, just go look. Just go see if the ground looks normal now, in the dark. Just to prove to yourself, it is nothing. I argued with myself the whole walk up that hill, my boots crunching on the gravel, the air colder than it should have been for that time of year, that kind of damp chill that gets into your sleeves. I could see my breath a little, and the rest of the cemetery was still. The flags by the veterans section barely moved, even though I could hear wind in the trees. The plastic flowers just rattled a little, and as I got to the old corner, my phone buzzed in my pocket and I pulled it out, and the time was 10:14. And I remember thinking, okay, remember that? 10:14. I do not know why I thought that, it just stamped in my head. I pointed my little work flashlight at the patch, and the first thing I saw was that the dirt in the center was smoother than before, like something had pressed up and then smoothed it from the inside with a flat hand. There were no indentations from animals, no paw marks, nothing. Just this smooth oval in the middle of otherwise rough ground. I stuck the toe of my boot on it again, and it felt warm, not hot, just like it had been in the sun. Except the sun had been down for almost an hour. I stood there too long, listening, and the longer I stood there, the more I had this feeling that I was being rude. Like I had stepped into a room where someone was trying to sleep and I was just standing at the foot of the bed staring. And the thought came into my head clear as anything. He knows you are standing on him, and I did not put that thought there. It just showed up. I backed away and told myself I was being stupid. I went home, microwaved some leftover chicken, watched a replay of a football game, but when I got in bed, I could not stop thinking about that warm patch under my boot. And sometime in the night, I woke up out of a dead sleep with my heart pounding, and I grabbed my phone and the screen said 2:14. And I lay there, listening to my own breath, and then there was this weird thing. Like my brain put together the number from earlier, 10:14, and this one, 2:14. And I thought, that is nothing. That is just numbers. You are tired? And I told myself if I checked the time again, it would say something different and this would all just go away. Next day I went in, told myself I was not going to walk up to that plot at all. I was going to stay near the front unless I had to go up. But work being what it is, there was always something pulling me back. Someone had left a wreath up there that needed to be moved, a tree branch fallen near the path. All these small things, and every time I tried to ignore that unmarked place, my eyes kept going to it, like when you have a sore tooth and you keep poking it with your tongue. By then, the idea had gotten in my head that maybe there was some kind of sinkhole starting, or a broken vault, something that could be a safety issue. And I used that to justify what I did next, because it is easier to tell yourself you are just doing your job than admit you are feeding your own fear. I went into the shed, grabbed one of the little trail cameras we sometimes use to see what is knocking things over at night. Deer, kids, whatever. And I walked it up to that corner around lunchtime. Clear sky, bright sun, birds all over, nothing spooky at all. I strapped the camera to one of the metal fence posts at the edge of the old section, pointed it straight at that unmarked patch, and set it to record with motion, and also take a still every minute. I checked the battery, checked the card, did everything right. I have done it 100 times. And I walked back down and told myself, there. Now you will see it is just an animal, or the light, or your eyes. You will pull the card and laugh at yourself. The rest of the day, every time I passed the office window and could see even the top edge of that slope, my stomach would tighten. Like knowing the camera was watching, it made the whole thing more real, not less. We did not have any services that evening, so by 5 the director was gone. Rigsby had gone home with his crossword under his arm, and it was just me and the stones and the big key ring. I locked the church, locked the side gate, turned off the office light, and stood for a second looking out that window toward the back. And I had this sudden thought, like a clear picture of that dirt rising up in front of the lens and filling the whole frame. And I almost went up right then to take the camera down, but I stopped myself and said, "No, you wanted to know. Remember, you wanted proof," and I went home. I could not relax though. I kept checking the time, and then, when I got sleepy, it was like my body was waiting for something, like it knew the schedule and I did not. And again, when I startled awake in the middle of the night, my phone in my hand, the numbers were there, 2, 14, and this time, as I stared at them, I realized it was the second night in a row that exact time had pulled me out of sleep. I tried to tell myself it happens more than you think. People just do not notice when it is 1:37 or 3:09. But when it is something that sticks, your brain holds on to it. I told myself that, and then I lay there for a long time listening to the quiet of my house and feeling like someone was standing in the hallway outside my bedroom, not moving, just facing the door. In the morning, I got up more tired than when I went to bed, went in to work, and I did not even pretend this time. I went straight up the hill with the little key for the camera, my heart climbing with me, the grass still wet and cold around my boots, my breath showing again even though it was not really that cold. And when I got to the corner, the first thing I noticed was that there were no prints in the dirt around the grave. No animal tracks, no shoe marks. The ground around was untouched, and the patch itself looked exactly the same as the day before. That smooth oval, slightly higher than it should be, just sitting there. The camera looked normal. Little red light blinking, like it always does. And I popped it open, pulled the card, slipped it into my pocket, and walked back down, telling myself not to look at any pictures until I was in the office with the lights on. I shut the office door, sat in the chair at the computer, my hands leaving little damp marks on the mouse, and I clicked through the images, frame after frame of daylight. Nothing special. A bird hopping nearby, a leaf blowing across once, 2 kids in the distance cutting across the top of the cemetery line where they were not supposed to be. I made a note to talk to them later. And then, because the camera also records video with motion, I opened the first clip file, and that is where things stop making sense in the way they should. The first few videos were just the same as the pictures. Me walking up to install the camera, me walking away, a stray dog sniffing at the fence line, and then leaving. Nothing at the plot itself. And then I saw a clip with a timestamp that made my mouth go dry. It said 2:13:47 inches the morning, and the thumbnail was just the usual grainy image of the grave. I clicked it, and the screen filled with that dark, static-lit picture. The little unmarked patch dead center. The trees behind it just shapes, the whole thing washed in that blue-gray you get from cheap cameras at night. And for the first second, there was nothing. Just that stillness. And then, right when the timer in the corner ticked over to 2 hours 14 minutes, the picture broke, all at once, into static. Not the light fuzz you get from bad reception. I mean thick, heavy snow, black and white chewing across the whole screen. Loud too, the speakers crackling hard enough that I flinched back in the chair. It stayed like that for maybe 10 seconds, just roaring static. And then, just as sudden, the picture snapped back and everything was calm again. No sign anything had moved through the frame. The clip ended. I sat there staring at the file list, and there were 2 more videos after that, both from later in the night, showing nothing, just the same patch in the dark. I replayed the 2:14 clip 3 times, watching to see if maybe just before the static there was a shadow or a light or anything that could have triggered motion. The image just died and came back like someone had put a hand directly on the lens. I told myself it was a bad card, that the whole thing was glitching. So I checked other clips from other days on that same card, and they were all fine. No static, no jumps, just normal, boring footage of deer and weather and nothing. It is hard to explain the way that 10 seconds of static felt, because static is nothing. You hear it all the time. But sitting in that office, with the blinds half open and the graves just outside and the little wall clock ticking over my head, it felt like listening to someone breathing too close to your ear on the phone, like there was something alive inside that sound, and it did not want me seeing what was happening out there. I carried the camera back up and put it right back in place. Same angle, same settings, and that afternoon, I was useless. I barely got anything done because I kept thinking about the coming night, about that timer, about how I had never noticed what time I woke up all those other nights until now, and that if it said 2:14 again, I was going to lose it. When I went home, I tried to wear myself out. I went for a walk. I did dishes I had been ignoring. I watched some show about people building houses in the woods, but my mind kept drifting back to that patch of earth and the way the dirt had felt warm under my boot. And when I finally got into bed, I lay there staring at the ceiling for so long that when I did drift off, it felt like I just blinked, and then my eyes snapped back open, and my hand was already reaching for my phone because I knew what it was going to say. It was 2:14, not 2:13 or 2:15, exactly 2:14. Bright in my face in the dark room, and as I stared at those numbers, there was this sound in my house, this low, slow scrape, like someone dragging their fingers along the underside of the floorboards under my bed. Not fast, not in a hurry, just letting me know they were there. I froze, every muscle in me tight, listening, and the sound stopped. And the only thing I could hear was my own breathing and the little ticking of the clock in the kitchen. And I stayed like that until the numbers ticked over to 2:15, and then I finally sucked in a deep breath and told myself I was hearing the house settle, or a branch outside, or anything else. I threw the phone on the nightstand face down and did not sleep again. By the time I got to work the next day, I was running on fumes, hands shaking when I tried to pour my coffee, and the director even asked if I was sick, but I lied and said I had just stayed up too late watching a game, and he laughed and said I was too old for that. And I went about my day pretending I was fine. Every little sound jumped me. The clang of a shovel in the shed, the ring of the phone in the office, and all the while, up on the hill, the camera sat watching that patch. Around noon, I could not take it anymore and I trudged up there, my boots heavy, the sun higher but not really warming anything, the grass damp as ever. And I yanked the card from the camera and took it back down, locked the office door, sat at the computer and loaded the files, already knowing there would be a clip with that time on it. There it was, same timestamp, 2 hours, 13 minutes and 50 seconds. 2 hours, 14 minutes. And I opened it. And again, the screen showed that same grainy picture for a second. The unmarked grave quiet, and then the static slammed in. Louder this time, like whoever or whatever was behind it knew I would be listening. And as it roared, I heard something buried inside it. Like when you hear a voice under running water, and I leaned closer before I could stop myself. And I swear I heard words. I could not make them all out. It was like someone muttering, but I heard parts of sentences. The kind of things you hear at every funeral and every Sunday in that church. Phrases about dust and breath and speaking and not being silent, but twisted a little. Said wrong, like taken apart and put back together by someone who did not care about what they meant, only that they were being said. When the static cut off and the picture came back, my ears were ringing and I felt this pressure in my chest, like I had been holding my breath without noticing. I must have sat there for a good 10 minutes just staring at the stopped frame, because the next thing I remember is Rigsby knocking on the glass of the office door, making me jump so hard I almost fell out of the chair. He opened the door a crack and asked if I was all right, said he had been calling my name from the porch and I had not answered, and I told him I was fine, just tired, and he looked past me at the screen and frowned. He asked what I was doing with the old trail cams, and I made the mistake of telling him. I said I had seen that old unmarked grave he talked about move a little, and he squinted at me like he was trying to decide if I was messing with him, And then he got real serious and told me a story I wish he had kept to himself. He said there were folks who thought that preacher back there never really stopped. That even after they buried him, there were reports of people hearing his voice up on that hill. Not loud, like when he was alive, but low, like he was still talking. And the only time it stopped was when somebody went up there and yelled back, told him to shut up. Those people, he said, had dreams after that, bad ones, about being under something heavy and not being able to move. And some of them talked about feeling warm breath on their neck when they were all alone. He said it like he was talking about the weather, not like a warning, just like some old thing he remembered. But the whole time he was speaking, I could feel that patch of ground in my head again, and the numbers 214 sitting next to it. When he left the office, I pulled the card out of the computer and put it back in the camera. And I knew, deep down, that I had to make a choice. I could ignore this, leave it alone, or I could do the thing that was already burning in my mind. The thing I kept seeing whenever I closed my eyes, which was a shovel blade cutting into that smooth dirt. For a few hours I tried to choose the first one. I went out, I mowed, I trimmed, I helped set up chairs for a service the next day. I swept the hallway of the church. I did everything I could to stay in the part of the grounds where there was light and people and sound. But as the afternoon turned toward evening and the sky lost that bright edge, I kept glancing toward the back hill. And the thought of leaving that camera up there for one more night made my skin crawl. It felt like I was letting something press its face closer to the glass while I looked away. The director left around 5, said he would see me in the morning, and I lied again. Said I had some tools to put away and I would lock up, and I watched his car pull away. I watched it disappear down the road. And then I went into the shed and took out a shovel. It was heavier than it needed to be. Or maybe it was just my arms. But walking up that hill, carrying it over my shoulder, with the camera watching the patch and the pines black against the sky, it felt like I was walking into something I had already agreed to without understanding the terms. The flags in the veterans section were limp. The wind had gone still. The only sound was the gravel under my boots. When I reached the unmarked spot, I stood there for a long time, the shovel in my hands, my breath coming short, and I tried to give myself one more chance to turn back. I told myself there could be a broken vault, a sinkhole, some kind of collapse that would mess up the whole corner, and that I would be doing the right thing by checking. I also told myself, quietly, under all that if I dug it up and it was just old bones and wood and nothing else, then I could sleep again, that the number on the clock would stop meaning anything, that the sound under my bed would go away. Nobody tells you how much of this job is just convincing yourself you are not walking across people, that you are just dealing with earth and stone. I pushed the shovel blade into the ground at the edge of that smooth patch and started to dig. The first few inches were easy, the soil coming up in clean slices, darker than the ground around it, a little damp but not wet, and there were no roots, no rocks, nothing to slow me down, like the earth had already been moved 100 times and knew the path. I dug around in a rough rectangle, sweat starting to run down my back even though the air was cool. And I kept telling myself I would stop when I hit wood. Just one more slice, then another, just to see, and the hole got deeper and the sides started to cave a little and I had to stomp them back. And somewhere in there, the light changed. I did not notice the sun drop. It just seemed like suddenly the air was darker and the shadows from the stones reached longer. And when I stopped to catch my breath and wipe my forehead on my sleeve, I realized I could not hear any birds, no traffic from the road, not even the distant hum of town, just my own breathing and the little sounds of dirt sliding down the sides of the hole. I checked my phone without thinking why, and the screen said 7:58, which meant I had been digging for almost an hour without noticing. The hole was down far enough now that I had to step into it to get more leverage, the walls coming up to my thighs. And as I stabbed the shovel down again, it hit something solid with a dull thud. I froze, all the noise in my head dropping out. I knelt and brushed at the dirt with my gloved hand, and uncovered old wood, gray and soft looking, the top of a coffin or a box. I could not tell which at first, just a flat surface with the grain of the boards running lengthwise. It looked like it had been there a very long time, but there were no signs of collapse. No big crack, just this one place, dead center, where the wood bulged up slightly, the same shape as that oval on the ground had been. I should have stopped there. I know that. That was the line, and I crossed it. I wanted to see how bad the bulge was. That was the excuse I gave myself. So I cleared more dirt away and found the edges of the lid, and the more I brushed, the more I realized something was off. The nails along the edge were not rusted the way they should have been. They were dull but straight, like someone had hammered them in last week and then painted them antique. The wood, when I pressed it with my fingers, did not crumble. It gave a little and then pushed back, like there was something under it that was not just empty space. My heart was going so loud I could feel it in my throat, and I stepped out of the hole and looked around, like there would be someone there to tell me what to do. But the hill was empty, the stones just standing there, and down near the church, the office windows were dark. I put the tip of the shovel under the edge of the lid and pried, careful at first, then harder when it did not want to move, and finally, with this little groan of wood. People talk about rot and all that, but this was like a basement, like old books, dry and close, not sweet or sour, just thick, like air that had not moved in a long time. I wedged the shovel more and lifted until there was enough space to get my hands under, and then I pushed, and the lid rose up and slid a little to the side, bumping my shoulder. I stared down into that box, that coffin, whatever word you want to use, and there was nothing in it. No bones, no cloth, no sign of a body ever being there, except for the shape of where one should have been, like the imprint you get on a mattress after someone has lain in it for years and then gotten up. The padding, or whatever they used back then, was flattened in a long, shallow dip, the way a person would have made it. But there was nothing there. What there was warmth. I put my hand out over that empty space, meaning to hover it, to test the air. But my fingers brushed the lining and I jerked back like I had touched a stove. Not from pain, but because it was warm, not room temperature, not the way a closed space can get stuffy, but the way a person's skin feels when they have been lying under a blanket. It was the warmth of someone who had just gotten up. My stomach turned over. I think I said something out loud then, something like, no, this is not right. And I scrambled, boots slipping on the side of the hole, dirt filling my shoes, and I clawed my way up and out, stumbling back far enough that I could see the whole thing at once, the open box, the dark rectangle in the earth, the camera on the fence post, still blinking its stupid little light at me. My chest hurt. My hands were shaking so hard I had to press them against my thighs to make them stop. And there was this feeling, strong and sudden, that I had my back turned to something that had been lying down for a very long time and was now standing up. I do not know how long I stood there like that. But then I became aware of another sound, under the pounding of my heart, under the blood in my ears, a low murmuring, like someone talking down the hill. I told myself it was the radio in my car drifting up. It sounded like a man speaking to a room full of people, half muttered, half shouted, that tone preachers get when they are trying to sound calm and stern at the same time. The words were not clear at first. They were like the ones I had heard in the static, bits and pieces. But as I stood there, rooted, they started to separate. Phrases I recognized from a lifetime of funerals and Sunday visits to that church, about dust returning to dust, about breath and words and being heard, but twisted again, the emphasis wrong, the order off, like someone repeating a speech from memory but changing it on purpose. And the sound was not coming from down the hill or from the road. It was coming from just behind me. I did not turn around. I could not. It was like my body knew if I looked directly where that voice was standing, my mind would not come back the same. So I looked straight ahead, at the open grave, at the empty, warm coffin, and I listened as that voice came closer without getting louder. Like the distance between us did not matter. I felt something touch the air at the side of my face. Not a hand, more like the shape of someone leaning in close. The way you feel when a person puts their mouth near your ear to speak over a crowd. The warmth of their breath before they say anything. And the voice said, my name. Not the wrong one on my shirt. My name the way my mother says it when she is worried. Darren. Then it started in on a verse. One I had heard at almost every burial I had worked. About the dead rising at the sound of a voice. Only now it was set out in this way that made it sound less like hope and more like a threat. Like someone saying, you cannot stop me from speaking. The worst part is not the words he said. It is that while he was saying them, I could feel the air in that empty coffin move. Like someone shifting their weight in a bed a few feet in front of me. I broke then. Whatever resolve I had about being respectful or careful snapped. I shoved the shovel into the dirt where I had been standing. More to have something in my hands than anything. And I ran. I did not fill the hole. I did not close the lid. I did not even look back. I ran down that hill, my boots slipping on the gravel, my lungs burning, the voice following me for a few words more, then dropping off like a radio being turned down. By the time I hit the flat part near the front rows, I could not hear it anymore. But I could still feel that warmth near my ear, the ghost of it, and I think I will feel that until the day they put me in one of those boxes. I did not go into the office. I did not turn off any lights. I went straight to my car, hands fumbling with the keys. And for a second, the engine did not turn over. Just that coughing sound. And I thought, this is it. You are going to be stuck here with him walking down that driveway. Too fast. Out of the gate and down the road. Not caring if anyone saw me. Not caring about anything but distance. I do not really remember the drive home. I remember the streetlights, and how when I passed the church, the bell tower light flicked off right as I went by, even though it is on a timer that should not care when my car is there. At home, I sat in the driveway in the dark for a long time. Engine off, hands on the wheel, trying to slow my breathing down. When I finally went inside, I locked the door, even though I never used to, and I went straight to the bathroom and scrubbed my hands like there was dirt on them that would not come off. That night, I did not even pretend I would sleep. I sat in the living room with every light on, the TV going just for noise. And still, right on time, at 2:14, the power flickered and came back. The TV cut out for a second, and in that one heartbeat of quiet, from somewhere that was not in my house, and not outside it either, there was that same voice, low and clear, saying a line I had heard in the static and up on the hill about how no one shuts the mouth that God has opened. I do not think I moved at all for the rest of the night. In the morning, I called in sick. I told the director I had a stomach thing, that I did not want to spread it. And he sounded annoyed, but he said, fine, feel better. I sat with my phone in my hand for hours after that, thumb on the contact, thinking about calling back and quitting right then. But the rent does not pay itself and work is work, and after a day and a half of my own thoughts, I told myself I had made it worse in my head, that if I went back and saw the hole filled in and everything normal, the voice would go away like a bad dream. I could see the top of that hill, the line of the old stones, and that corner where the unmarked grave was. The ground looked flat, no open hole, no mound of dirt, no coffin lid, just grass. For a second, I felt this rush of relief so sharp it hurt, like my body had been clenching for days and finally let go. I thought maybe I had filled it back in and just blocked it out, that my mind had been kind enough to erase the part where I did the right thing. Then, I noticed something else. The camera on the fence post was gone. I walked up there, each step heavier than it should have been, and the closer I got, the more wrong everything felt again. The grass was not just flat. It was new, like it had never been disturbed. No patch of different color, no settling, just even green right over where the hole had been. The spot where the camera had been strapped had no marks on the metal, like it had never been there. There were no filled-in shovel lines, no loose soil, nothing that said I had spent an hour digging a box out of that ground. The only thing that broke the smoothness was a faint oval, just like before, in the center of that invisible grave. And when I stepped onto it, against every instinct screaming at me not to, it was warm. I stood there, wobbling, feeling like someone had taken my memories and smoothed their edges the same way the earth had been smoothed. And I did the only thing I could think to do. I walked back down, went into the office, took my name tag off my shirt, put it on the desk, and wrote a note that said I was done. I did not give a reason. What would I write? The dead are not staying put. The voice does not want to be alone. I left the keys. I walked out and I shut the door behind me, and I did not look back. That was 3 months ago. Since then, I have not set foot in a cemetery for any reason. I told my family if they needed someone to visit stones, they would have to ask my sister. I drive a different way into town now, even though it takes longer, just so I do not have to pass the front gate and see if that oval of earth is still there, smooth and waiting. I still wake up at 2:14. Not every night, but enough that I dread going to bed. Sometimes when I wake, there is nothing but the clock and the quiet. Other times, there is a sound that is not the house, not the street. A low murmur, like someone speaking far away in a big empty room. And if I listen too hard, I start to pick words out, pieces of phrases about speaking and hearing and not being silenced, and I have to turn the TV on or the radio up just to drown it. I quit that job. I picked up work, hauling lumber and doing odd jobs. Stuff that keeps me away from stones and bells and flowers, but it does not change the fact that he knows my name now. That is what keeps me up. Not the box. Not the warmth. Not even the static. It is the way he said my name up there on that hill, like he had been waiting for someone to step on his grave and listen long enough for him to learn it. Tonight I am back at this gate because my cousin had a service here in the afternoon, and I did not come. In this car that will probably die on me if I turn the key too many times, watching the dark up that driveway, I told myself I was just going to drive past, just once, to see if the lights were still the same, if the office still has that little glow from the computer. But when I got here, I could not make myself pull away. I parked. I turned the engine off and on twice, testing it, and now I am just sitting, recording this on my cracked phone like some guy talking to himself, because I do not know what else to do with it. I am telling you this so that if you ever find yourself walking past the older part of some small cemetery, the corner with no stones, and you feel the ground under you a little warmer than it should be, you do not stand there listening like I did. You walk away. You do not put a camera on it. You do not dig. You do not ask old men in offices about who is buried where. You let him talk to the dirt and the roots and whatever else he has down there. Because once you have heard your own name spoken from behind you when no one is there, once you have felt breath on your ear from an empty grave, you will never hear another sermon, another prayer, another line at a funeral the same way again, not as comfort, but as someone testing the edges of a voice that does not care who it reaches, as long as it reaches someone. I cannot walk past cemeteries anymore. I turn my head when we drive by one. I pretend to look at my phone. I turn the radio up so I do not have to hear if anything cuts in between the stations. I am telling you this so that if one night, at 2:14, you wake up for no reason and hear static in the silence, you will know to roll over, cover your ears, and do not listen for the words inside it. Because once you hear them, once you understand that something under the ground wants to be heard more than anything, you will never get them out again. My name's Ethan Mallory. I'm from a little place called Ridgemont, up in northern Michigan. Just a couple turns off the highway where the road runs past the old county cemetery, and I work as a laborer on the road crew for the county. The kind of work where your hands stay cracked no matter how much lotion you use and your back starts hurting way before lunch. And I am sitting right now in my car by the gate to that same cemetery with the engine off. Because the battery light has been flickering for 2 days, and I am scared to waste it, and it is a little after 3 in the morning because my phone keeps lighting up to tell me the time even when I do not want to see it, and I am talking into this cracked screen, because if I go home and try to sleep without saying this out loud one more night, I feel like I am going to lose my mind. So listen, man, just listen. I know how this is going to sound. I know I'm going to sound tired or confused, or like I am mixing things up, and maybe I am, but I am telling you this exactly how I remember it, even the parts that do not line up, because those are the parts that will not let go of me, and I need you to hear it the way it sits inside my head. Messy and heavy and wrong. And if my voice cracks, I am not going to fix it. This is just how it comes out now. And I swear to God, none of this is a story to me. It is just what happened when we found that box under the road and it started growing. I did not wake up that first day thinking anything was strange. That is the thing that keeps bothering me. It started as one of those nothing days. I had the same cheap cereal in a chipped white bowl, stood there at the kitchen counter in my socks because the floor by the table gets cold. Drank coffee that tasted burned because I forgot the pot on while I was in the shower, threw on the same county road commission hoodie with the orange logo and that dark stain on the front from when the tar splashed a couple summers back. And I remember that stain so clearly because I tried scrubbing it out again that morning and it did not even fade. It never fades. And I checked the time on the microwave. 6:11. Same as usual, and then I checked it again on my phone. Just because I do that now. I double-check clocks, like I expect them to disagree. But back then, it was just a habit. Both said 6:11. No problem. And I grabbed my lunch pail, kissed the edge of the photo on the fridge, out of habit because my ex took the original, and I kept the copy. And I locked the door behind me and stepped out into that kind of cold that bites through your jacket before the sun is up. You know, the kind I mean. And there was nothing weird, just my breath in the air and the sound of my boots on the steps. I clocked in at the yard at 6:28. I remember because the punch clock was stuck a minute slow. And Gene, my foreman, was complaining about it like always, saying one of these days payroll was going to dock us and he would have to take the clock off the wall himself and set it. And we laughed. The way you laugh when you are half asleep and just waiting for the day to start. And it was just another Monday on the schedule board. Line of jobs written in bad marker across that whiteboard somebody got at a closing sale. And ours was the same one we had been doing off and on all month. County Road 14 realignment. Section by Evergreen Hollow, which is what people still call the old cemetery, even though the sign says Ridgemont Memorial Cemetery now, and they had us widening the curve there, where folks kept sliding in winter, pushing it back into that strip of trees and brush between the fence and the ditch. I did not think about the graves when I saw it on the board. I never really thought about them, even though we have driven past that place my whole life. It is just there, on the right when you head out of town. Stone wall, iron gate, rows of stones down the hill, and that day it was just another line of asphalt and dirt standing between us and going home. The sky was a flat gray when we rolled out. Not snowing yet, but promising it. And there were 4 of us in the truck. Me, Gene up front driving, and Kyle and Mario, both younger than me, both with their headphones around their necks, tapping on their phones like they could not stand to be alone with their own thoughts for 1 minute, and we had the trailer behind us with the little excavator and the compactor and crates of cones and those plastic barrels. I remember we argued about breakfast sandwiches the whole way out there. Whether the place on Elm made them better than the gas station on 3rd. The kind of nothing talk that feels safe. And I keep replaying that now because that road, that whole stretch, felt safe back then. And now, I cannot even drive past the sign without my stomach nodding. We parked the rig on the shoulder, set cones, did all the boring stuff. And the first real thing we did was take the saw to the asphalt along the white line, so we could tear that section up, and the whole time you could see the cemetery through the fence on the left, stones lined up on the slope, moss on some of them. That big maple tree near the middle with a trunk so wide you could not get your arms around it. I used to look at that tree as a kid from the back seat and try to count how many stones were near it before we went past. But as an adult, you just stop seeing things like that. You know, you just see work. We cut, we broke, we scooped. The excavator bucket took chunks of asphalt and dropped them into the dump truck. And by late morning, we were into the soil. Dark and wet, even though it had not rained in a week, and the smell came up, that heavy earth smell that sticks in your nose, mixed with old leaves. There was a chain link extension on the cemetery fence right where we were working, newer than the stone wall. Like they had pushed the boundary closer to the road at some point, or maybe just tried to stop kids climbing in. And beyond that, I could see the backs of a few headstones turned toward us, names I could not read from where I was, just pale shapes with dark stains. Nothing was strange until the bucket hit something that was not rock and not root. This dull thump that you can feel through the controls. Even if you have been running machines for years, Kyle stopped the excavator, backed it off, and we all leaned over the edge of the cut to look. There was wood down there, pale against the dark soil, and at first I thought it was just some rotten fence post that got buried when they redid the ditch 30 years ago, but it was too smooth, too flat, and it had this little metal corner piece catching the light. Gene cursed under his breath, then stopped himself, then said very quiet, "That looks like a box." And then he said, "No, that looks like a coffin." And all of us got real still. There are rules, for when you hit something like that, you do not just haul it out and keep going. There is paperwork and calls and people who have to come out. And a part of me was already annoyed because I knew it would mean delays and questions and maybe losing some overtime, and that is the part of myself I hate the most now. That very first thing I felt was not fear or respect. It was, great, more hassle. We cleared carefully around the edges with shovels. No more machinery. The dirt was cold and clumped, and after a while the shape came into view. And it was a coffin, but smaller than I expected, maybe 3 feet long, if that, with these rusted little handles on the sides that looked like they were meant for a child's hands to touch, not to hold any real weight. The wood was gray and dried, but it had not fallen apart, not like the rotten barn boards you sometimes find. It held together, and there was a tiny metal plate on the lid near what would have been the head end, all dull except for one corner where the dirt had polished it somehow. Mario said, "That is a baby box." And then he stepped back, like he had said something he should not say. And I remember the way the wind sounded right then, just a little gust through the plastic flowers on the closest grave, making them rattle. Gene called the office. The office called the sheriff. The sheriff called the county clerk, and the historical society and probably his brother for all I know. And we were told to stop digging, secure the area, wait. So we set up a makeshift barrier and stood there like we were guarding something. And cars slowed on the road, and people stared. And through the fence, the stones looked closer than they had that morning, like the whole cemetery had shuffled a few feet downhill while we were not looking. That is probably just my mind. I know that. But I am telling you what it felt like. The sheriff came in his tan jacket, with 2 deputies. They took pictures, they talked low, and then this woman from the historical society showed up. Gray hair, long coat, big scarf, and a folder under her arm, and she asked if she could get closer. So we stepped back and watched her lean over that little box like it was something fragile on a museum table. She brushed some dirt off the plate with the sleeve of her coat and squinted at it, and then she looked at the sheriff and said, 1902, and then she frowned, real deep, and said, "This was not supposed to be here." And the sheriff asked what she meant, and she said, "The family plots are up on the hill. The child burials are not anywhere near the road." Then she looked at me, for some reason, not at Gene, not at the sheriff, and said, "Did anyone move this before I got here?" And I told her no, not an inch. And she held my eyes like she was checking if I was lying, and then nodded like, "All right." And she wrote something down. They decided they had to get it out of there and somewhere secure until they figured out what to do. And because we had the equipment and the straps and all that, it fell to us to help, which I did not want but did not argue about. Jean said we would lift it by hand. No chains, nothing that could crush the wood. So me and him and Kyle climbed down into that trench and got our gloved hands under the little handles and the edges, and I expected it to be heavy. Even small, you expect weight from something meant to hold a body, but when we lifted it, my arms almost flew up. It weighed almost nothing. Like an empty toolbox. Less even. Like a prop. And my stomach dropped in this stupid way because it felt wrong. Like the box was pretending. That is the only word I have for it. Pretending to be what it was supposed to be. Mario must have seen the look on my face because he asked, "Is it heavy?" And I said, "No, that is the problem." And Jean told me to shut up and focus. But I saw his jaw tighten. We carried it up and set it on the back of the flatbed. Laid blankets under it so it would not slide. And the sheriff said he would follow us back to the yard where there was a locked garage. Until the county decided if they would move it straight to the funeral home or wait for some state person. And while they were talking, the woman from the historical society kept touching the lid with her fingertips. More to herself than us? Born wrong. And when I asked what she meant, she showed me a little note she had written from the records in her folder. And it said, "Child. Surname Havelock. Born wrong. Buried without blessing." And I remember getting angry, not at her, but at whoever had written that. Because what kind of person writes that about a baby? And she must have seen that on my face because she said, "It is just how they talked then. It does not mean anything now." But she did not sound convinced. We drove back with that little box strapped down behind us. Like maybe something inside was pushing, even though I knew that did not make sense. And every time I looked, it was just the same. Gray wood. Rusted hardware. Metal plate catching no light now because the clouds had thickened. At the yard, they cleared a corner of the small garage where we keep cones and salt bags, moved some old tires, and put the coffin on a low work table. And the sheriff locked the big padlock on the garage door and put one of those evidence seals over it, like they do on crime shows. And then he handed a key to Jean and kept one himself and told us nobody touches that door until they say so. The rest of the day was a wash. We did some cleanup on the site, but everything felt off, like the angles were wrong. And when I got home that night, I turned the TV on and just let it play some game show without listening, and I could not stop thinking about how light that box had felt in my hands. Lighter than the cooler I carried to work. Lighter than the box of nails in the back of my truck. And I kept thinking about that phrase, "born wrong," like it was stuck under my skin. I tried to sleep, and I would almost get there, and then I would hear this faint scratching in my head. Like something trying to get through wood. Not loud, just steady. And I told myself it was pipes or branches or my upstairs neighbor moving furniture. But every time I checked the clock, it had only been a few minutes, and I did not remember drifting off at all. The next morning, I showed up to the yard with my eyes burning. And Kyle laughed and asked if I had been out late. And I said no, I just did not sleep right. And he said, "You thinking about the baby box?" And that is what they called it from then on, the baby box. And I told him to knock it off. But I was thinking about it. I had been thinking about it all night. Jean told us we were on light duty until the county signed off on us going back to the dig. So most of the morning was just cleaning equipment and doing inventory. And around 10, he said, "We have to go check on that thing." The sheriff locked it, and Jean held up the key and said, "He told me to check for leaks, in case anything is seeping out." And the way he said it, I could not tell if he was joking. We went to the little garage, just the two of us. The others stayed in the main bay, and I remember my heart speeding up for no real reason, while he peeled off that evidence tape and turned the cold key in the padlock. When he rolled the door up, the smell hit me first. But it was not decay. Not like you would think. It was just dust and rubber and cold air, same as always. and the box was there on the table. Same gray wood, same metal plate, same rusted handles. But I swear to you, man, I swear to God, it did not look the same size. Yesterday, it had been this small thing with room to spare on that table, space on each side where you could set a toolbox, and now it filled more of the surface, maybe an inch or two closer to the edges. And my brain did this quick flip like it was trying to adjust what it remembered to fit what it was seeing. And for a second, I almost convinced myself I had misjudged it yesterday, that it had always been a little bigger than I thought. But then I saw the marks. When we set it down the day before, the dust on the table had been thick enough that the outline of the box and our handprints showed up clear. I remembered that because Kyle joked that it looked like a crime scene, and now, around that first faint rectangle, there was a second, sharper line in the dust. Further out, like someone had lifted the box in the night and set it back down a little farther spread, and the legs of the table creaked a little under the weight that had not bothered them yesterday. Gene saw it too. I know he did, because he crouched down and looked along the length of it, like you do when you are checking if something is warped. And he did not say anything for a long time. Then finally, he cleared his throat and said, "Wood swells when you move it out of the ground. That is probably all." And I wanted to believe that so badly that I nodded right away. But then I stepped closer and put my fingers on the lid to feel the grain. And the gap where the lid met the base on the foot end was not flush anymore. There was a space now, not big, maybe the thickness of 2 coins. But yesterday it had been tight, sealed with old nails. I could see shadow in there, darker than it should be. And I almost put my eye down close to look. But something in me locked up, and I could not make my body do it. Gene said, "Back up, Ethan." And I did, and he pressed down on the lid with both hands, and you could hear this faint groan from the wood like it did not want to move. And then it settled a little, but not all the way. The gap stayed. "Humidity," he said. But his palms were damp when he took them off. I could see the print on the faded paint. He told me to grab my phone and take a couple pictures for records, which is not something we normally do, but I pulled it out and clicked a few shots. The whole table, the corner with the metal plate, the edge of the lid. And I remember my hands shaking so much that the first 3 came out blurry. When I looked up, Gene was staring at the padlock he had set on the floor, like he was trying to remember putting it there. "Did you hear anything last night?" he asked, still not looking at me. And I said, "What kind of anything?" And he said, "From your place. From this garage, I do not know. Just anything." And I said no, which was a lie, because I had heard scratching. But it had come from my ceiling, my walls, my head, not from this building. He locked it back up, but this time he did not put a new evidence seal on. He just looped the chain and walked away fast, like we had opened a freezer and found something half rotten inside and wanted to forget about it. The next couple of days blurred, but certain things are clear, like little sharp pictures in a pile. At lunch that day, Kyle said, "I heard something from that garage when I came in early," and Mario told him to shut up. And I asked, "What did you hear?" And he said, "Just this dragging sound, like someone was pulling a pallet across the floor back and forth, and when I opened the main door, it stopped, and Gene snapped at him. 'You cannot hear that from the driveway.' And Kyle said, 'I am telling you I did.' And then he went quiet and ate his sandwich like he regretted saying anything. That afternoon, for reasons I still do not really get, we set up a phone in the little garage, propped up on a paint can on the shelf, leaning against a box of gloves, with the camera pointed at the table, and we hit record before locking the door. It was Gene's idea. He said it was to document any environmental changes for the county, but I think he just wanted proof that nothing was happening, that we were spooking ourselves for no reason. We let it run for an hour while we did inventory in the next building. And when we checked it, the footage was just us, in grainy wide angle, coming and going before and after, the box sitting dead still on the table. So we set it up again after everyone left. Same spot, same angle, propped on a different paint can in case the height had thrown it off, and we left it there overnight. I did not sleep any better that night than the night before. The scratching sound came back as soon as I turned out my bedside lamp, steady and patient. And I tried blasting the TV, I tried earplugs, I even tried music through my phone. But underneath all that noise, I could still sense it, this soft insistence. And every time I checked the clock, barely any time had passed. At one point, sometime after 2, I sat up and almost called Gene to tell him I could hear it from across town. But I stopped because I knew how that would sound, and he has a family, a house full of people. He did not need me dragging him into my half-awake panic. The next morning, when we opened the little garage to get the phone, the box looked bigger again. I know I sound like a broken record. I know how crazy it sounds, but it is what happened. The overhang of the lid was closer to the edge of the table. The handle sat a little lower, and the gap at the foot end was wider, big enough now that you could see, if you got down low enough, that there was a lining inside. Yellowed cloth, wrinkled and pressed up against the wood like somebody's shoulders had filled it from within. I did not do that. I did not crawl under. I just saw the edge, just enough, and my stomach rolled. Gene shut off the recording and we huddled around his phone to watch it right there on the cold concrete. The video started normal. Him setting it up, the timer reading 17:32, the door rolling down. Then just the still image of the table and the coffin in the weak light from the small window for hours, the timestamp ticking ahead, and I started to relax a little, thinking we would see nothing, that it really was just our nerves. Then there was a jump. One frame, the timestamp was 1 hour 13 minutes and 6 seconds. The next it was 1 hour 18 minutes and 6 seconds, like 5 minutes, had vanished. The angle did not change, the light did not change, but in that second frame, the box sat closer to the edge of the table. Maybe an inch, maybe less, but it was enough that we all sucked in a breath at the same time. There was no sound on the recording except a faint hum from somewhere. No footsteps, no voices, just that jump and the box shifted. We watched it again. Then again. Scrubbing back and forth. And every time it made my skin crawl. Not because of anything dramatic, but because something had happened in those missing minutes, and whatever it was had left the room looking almost the same, just wrong if you knew where to look. We turned the sound all the way up, and this time we heard something else. Almost under the hum, this faint scratching, like nails or maybe a small tool dragging across wood inside a bigger wooden box, steady for a few seconds, then stopping. Could be mice, Mario said. But his voice shook, and Gene said, "Mice do not move furniture," and nobody laughed. By then the county had decided to get the funeral home involved, officially because they wanted the remains, if there were any, to be handled respectfully and in accordance with state law. But I think some of them just wanted it out of our building. The funeral director, a man named Harris who had done both my parents' services, showed up with a small crew and a gurney, and they laid the coffin on it and strapped it down like they do with the full-sized ones, and I watched his face while he lifted it. He expected it to be heavy too. I could see it in the way he set his feet, and for a moment his arms rose too fast, the same way mine had, like the weight, or the lack of it, surprised him. He covered it with a sheet. Not all the funeral homes do that with closed coffins, but he did, and they rolled it out into the daylight, into the white glare of a sky that finally decided to start shedding light snow. I should have let it go then. I should have let it leave my life right there in the parking lot. But Harris caught my eye and jerked his chin toward the hearse, and later that day I found myself standing in the prep room at the funeral home, my boots squeaking on the polished floor, looking at that little covered shape again. The room was cold. Stainless steel tables, cabinets with labeled drawers, smell of disinfectant, and lilies from somewhere else in the building. And the only sound was the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Harris pulled back the sheet and said, "I need a witness for any handling," which I doubt was true, but I nodded, because I owed him for how he handled my dad's service. And he took out a cloth tape and started measuring the length, the width, the height, just for my records, he said, and wrote numbers down on a clipboard. 3, 2 by 1, 1, he muttered at first, breathing harder than the size warranted, and 8 inches high. And I watched his hand write 32, 11, 8 on the paper. He walked me through the whole chain of custody talk. When it left the ground, when it came to us, when it came here, trying to sound calm. And then he said, "I am not opening it until we hear from Lansing," and that was that. Or it should have been. 2 days later, he called me at home. It was after 9. I had just turned off the TV. I was trying to ignore the feeling that something was standing just beyond the range of the streetlight outside my window, and my phone lit up with his name. I remember the exact words, because I have heard them in my head every night since. "Ethan, Pat, add every 30, he said. "Did you move that little coffin when you were here?" And I said no. And he said, "Did anybody from your crew come by after?" And I said, "No, why?" And he said, "Because I measured it again today, and either I wrote the numbers wrong or it grew." He half laughed after he said it, like he was making a joke he hated. And I asked what he meant, trying to keep my voice steady, and he said, "It is 36 by 13 by 10 now. That table has marks along the edge. Tape residue from when we size full caskets. I know where a baby one is supposed to hit, and this one is over the line." We sat there in silence, both breathing into our phones. And then he said, "Forget I said that. I am tired. I have been on my feet all day," and he hung up. The next morning I went by the funeral home on some excuse about paperwork, but when I asked to see him, his assistant said he was out. Family emergency. And the prep room door was closed. That afternoon, a call came down from the county office. The state had signed off on reinterring the remains in the original family plot, which, according to the records, was not in the main cemetery at all, but in a small private one on the Havelock land, an old farm north of town that had been split and sold decades ago. The plot was still technically there, a square of ground in a patch of woods behind a subdivision, overgrown and half forgotten, with a fence that had rusted away in places and stones leaning at strange angles, the kind of place kids might dare each other to go at night, if they even knew it existed. We were told to clear a path with the truck, dig a proper small grave next to the existing family stones, and assist with the reburial. Small, the man on the phone said, "For the child casket," and his choice of words made my mouth go dry. The day we did it, the snow finally came down for real. Not a blizzard. Not the kind that knocks out power. Just a steady, soft fall that muffled everything, laid over the piles of dead leaves like a clean sheet. We drove the flatbed with chains on the tires up the service road that ran behind the subdivision, then turned off onto a track that was barely more than 2 ruts between trees. At the end of the track, there was a sagging gate made of 2x4s and old wire. No sign, no marker, but beyond it, up a slight rise, were stones. Maybe 8 or 10 of them. Some tall, some short, half swallowed by brush. This was the Havelock family plot, the abandoned burial site from the records, the place whoever wrote "born wrong" had meant. We parked on the flattest bit of ground we could find and got out. The sound of the engine clicking as it cooled off seemed too loud. Under the snow, you could feel the unevenness of the ground, dips and humps where old graves had settled long ago, and every step felt like a risk. The air tasted like metal, like when you bite your tongue, and the only other sound was the faint rattle of plastic flowers on one of the nearer stones. Some long-forgotten decoration still holding on. Harris was there, his coat too thin for the cold, face pale, eyes shadowed. standing by the back of the hearse where the little coffin waited, covered again with a sheet. He nodded at us, no small talk this time, and said, "We will keep this simple. There was no pastor, no family, nobody but us, and the snow and the old names on the stones. The headstone closest to where we were supposed to dig leaned so far it was almost flat, the carving worn, but you could still make out the surname, Havelock, and a few dates mostly from the late 1800s. There was no marker for a child, not that I could see. We set our shovels down, cleared a rectangle in the thin snow, and started digging a new grave beside that tilted stone. About 3 feet down, just enough to satisfy the requirement, the soil dark and heavy and clumping on the blades. While we dug, Harris opened the hearse and slid the small coffin out onto a portable stand. When he pulled the sheet back this time, I could see right away that there was nothing small about it anymore. It was not baby-sized, not even close. It was maybe 5 feet long now, maybe more. The kind of size you would use for a teenager or a short adult. The handles further apart, the wood sides taller. The metal plate looked the same, but its position on the lid was different relative to the ends, like the box had stretched around it. "Did you requisition a different one?" Gene asked, his voice thin. And Harris shook his head once, sharp. "Same plate, same nails, same grain in the wood," he said, almost snapping. And then softer, "Same box." Snowflakes landed on the lid and did not melt right away. Just sat there, tiny dots of white on gray. I could feel my heart in my throat. "We cannot put that in a child's grave," I said before I could stop myself. And Harris gave me a look that was not angry, just exhausted, and said, "We are putting it where it always should have been." Like that answered anything. When the hole was ready, we set our shovels aside and stood there, staring at the stand and the box on it, nobody moving to lift. Finally, Harris took a breath and said, "All right," and grabbed one end, and Gene and I took the other. And again, the weight was wrong. It should have been heavy now, at that size, but it still felt light, lighter than it looked, like it was full of crumpled paper instead of anything real. And that mismatch made my hands tingle. We carried it the few feet to the grave and lowered it onto the straps we had laid across. And when we set it down, I felt a faint vibration through the wood. Not from any motion on the outside, but from inside, like something shifting its weight on soft padding. "Did you feel that?" I whispered. And Gene said, "Stop," through clenched teeth. We were supposed to say a few words, something respectful, even if no family was there. But Harris just bowed his head and murmured something I could not hear, maybe a standard phrase, maybe a prayer he half remembered. And the snow kept falling, soft and patient. Then it happened. I wish I could tell you exactly how long we stood there. But time did something strange. Well, 1 second I was looking at the lid, watching the flakes settle, feeling the aching cold in my fingers. And the next there was a cracking sound, like a board in a house settling. Only sharper, closer, and the lid shifted under its own weight. The wood along the edges bowed outward, the old nails squealing, and the gap at the foot end, which had been maybe the width of 2 fingers, widened with a slow, steady push until it was wide enough to see darkness inside. There was no one near it. None of us touched it. "Back," Harris said, his voice thin. And we all stepped away, even though part of me wanted to throw my weight on top, to force it shut. The cracking continued, low and steady, like someone was pressing outward from inside. But there was no thumping, no thrashing, just this relentless outward pressure, and then one of the sideboards split from end to end with a dry snap. The sound seemed to echo in the little plot, bouncing off the stones. The lid lifted a few inches all along its length, and then settled at an angle, propped by whatever it was caught on. All I could see inside was shadow and the pale blur of the lining. I do not know what I expected to see. Bone, cloth, nothing. But for a moment I could not breathe because it felt like the whole world had gone quiet to watch. Then something brushed against the inside of the lining. from within. Not hard, just enough to make the cloth bulge and smooth out like a hand pressing from below. And I heard it, all of us did, the faintest scratching, like fingernails on fabric-covered wood, moving toward the foot of the coffin, then stopping. The snow was falling harder now, but around the box it seemed to hesitate, hanging in the air before it landed, and I thought, this is wrong. This is wrong in a way I cannot fix. We need to get out of here, Mario said, his voice high, and he was right, but nobody moved. Then the scratching started again. Not from the box this time, but from under our boots. Just a tiny shift, the soil giving, like something was moving below us, something that had been there a long time and was only now remembering how to stretch. I stepped back, heart pounding, and my heel hit the edge of the shallow grave we had dug. I looked down, expecting to see nothing more than dirt and snow and that broken open box. But what I saw instead is what will not leave me alone. There, in the fresh snow at the head of the grave, where there had been only our boot marks a moment before, were footprints. Small ones at first, bare feet, the toes splayed a little like on a child just learning to walk, pressed into the thin layer of powder, each one crisp and clear, no smudge between them like you would expect if someone had stomped through. Just a neat line leading away from the end of the coffin toward the trees. They started right at the edge of the grave. No approach, no return, as if whoever made them had stepped straight out of the air or up from the ground. The distance between them was wrong for that size foot too. A little too long a stride, like the legs had to be longer than the feet wanted them to be. Tell me those were there before, Jean whispered, but we all knew they were not. We had cleared that patch of snow ourselves minutes earlier, Harris said. This is vandalism. But his voice was shaking so badly the words barely came out. Somebody is playing a trick, he said. But there were no other marks, no boot prints leading to where those small ones began. No sign of anyone else, and the woods beyond the fence were untouched, just smooth white broken by the trunks of trees. The footprints went in a straight line for maybe 10, 12 steps, then another thing that did not make sense happened. As we watched, the last print in the line, the one closest to the trees, deepened, like more weight had pressed down on it, even though nobody was there. The impression widened slightly, the toes sinking deeper, the heel stretching. And for a heartbeat, I thought I saw the shape of it change, not like a trick of melting, but like the foot that had made it had shifted, grown. I blinked, and it was just a footprint again. But now it looked bigger than the first one, as if the feet that had walked away from that box had been changing size with every step. We are leaving, Jean said, like a man giving an order in a storm. And we did. We did what he said. We backed away from the grave. We grabbed our shovels and left them by the truck. We did not even fill the hole. We just left it gaping there with the broken coffin half in and half out of the earth like something trying to decide which side it belonged on. Harris slammed the hearse doors even though there was nothing inside it now but empty straps. And we drove back down that track in silence, the branches scraping the sides of the truck louder than any argument. At the main road, he peeled off toward town, and we headed back to the yard, and none of us spoke for the whole drive. At the yard, the county rep was waiting, and Jean took him into his office and shut the door, and I sat on an overturned bucket staring at my work boots, watching the snow melt off them in little dark spots, trying to match what I had just seen with any explanation that did not involve me questioning every assumption I had about dead things staying where they are put. Later that day, a report came through, the official line. The excavation had disturbed a historical burial. The remains had been reinterred in the family plot in accordance with state guidance, and any anomalous impressions in the snow were likely the result of animal activity or misinterpretation under stressful conditions. That is what it said, right there in black and white. No mention of a coffin changing size. No mention of missing minutes on a video. No mention of the weight that was wrong or the sound that moved from wood to soil. I tried to talk to Harris again, but when I finally caught him in the hallway at the funeral home a week later, he just shook his head and said, "You did good work out there, Ethan. Let it be." And when I said, "You told me on the phone it grew," he looked through me like I was a stranger and said, "I do not know what you are talking about," and walked away. Maybe he convinced himself. Maybe somebody convinced him. I do not know. Our crew went back to finish the road the next week. We widened the curve like we were supposed to, laid new gravel, poured asphalt, painted fresh lines. If you drive it now, you would never know that anything had been dug up there at all. The cemetery is a couple of feet further from the edge. That is all. More room for snowplows to pass. But I could feel it every time I stepped near that patch of dirt before the new base went in, like a faint buzzing under my boots, like the ground was not as solid as it looked. On the last day, when we pulled the cones and reopened the road, I told Gene I did not want to be the one to drive the test run, and he did not ask why. He just took the wheel himself, and when he came back, he was paler than when he left. "Feels different," he said, and then he never mentioned it again. You want to know how it ended, right? What the final thing was that pushed me over from being just scared to being whatever I am now. This person, parked by a cemetery gate at 3 a.m, whispering into a phone. It was not some big scene, not out there in the woods or on the job. It was 3 nights after we finished the road. I was in my apartment, 3rd floor. Nothing fancy. Same one I am sitting here thinking about instead of driving back to. It was late, of course. I do not fall asleep before 2 anymore. I had the TV on low, some cooking show I was not watching, and I kept getting up to check the lock on my door and the latch on my bedroom window, even though I knew they were fine. Around 1, my phone buzzed with a weather alert, something about more snow coming, and when I picked it up, the photo app opened by mistake. The last images in there were the ones I had taken in the garage, the little coffin on the table, gap at the end, outline in the dust, and I started scrolling through them without really meaning to, just punishing myself. Then, I saw one that I had not taken. It was a shot from the prep room at the funeral home, from the same angle where Harris had pointed his overhead camera, showing the coffin on the table. In this one, the box was bigger, almost full length of the table, lid bulging in places, and the timestamp in the corner was a time I knew I had been at home. I could see the blurry shape of Harris's back near the edge of the frame, the curve of his shoulder, and I knew that image had come from his system, not from my phone. But there it was in my camera roll, like it had been copied without either of us doing it. In the reflection on the stainless steel cabinet behind the table, something else showed, not clear, not some face leering, nothing like that. Just a smudge of darker shape near the foot of the box. The height of a small child, maybe. Or a bent adult. It is hard to tell, and where its feet would have been, the floor looked wrong, blurred. Like the light could not decide how to fall there. I deleted the photo. I did it without thinking, thumb pressing the trash icon, then emptying the recently deleted folder, wiping it out as if it were just a bad selfie. But it did not help, because I had already seen it. That was the night the scratching moved from the edges of my hearing to right under my bed. I tried to sleep, and every time I started to drift, I would feel the faintest tremor in the mattress, like something small was shifting its weight underneath the frame. And I knew it was ridiculous. I knew there was nothing there, but my muscles locked, and I lay there until dawn, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. After that, I started changing my routes. If I had to drive past the cemetery for work, I would turn up the radio loud enough to make my ears ring and stare straight ahead, not letting my eyes slide to the left where the stones marched down the hill. On days off, I took the long way anywhere, even if it added 20 minutes, just to avoid catching sight of any gate, any fence, any line of headstones against the sky. When my cousin asked me to go with her to a funeral 2 towns over, I said no, and when she asked why, I just said, "I cannot." And she stopped calling for a while after that. I put a towel over the mirror in my bedroom because sometimes, in the edge of my vision, I thought I could see small, wet footprints drying on the floor behind me, even though there was no snow inside, even though the carpet stayed clean when I turned to look. Months went by. The road opened, people drove it, life went on. For everyone else, anyway. For me, every day now has two layers. The one where I go to work and eat and nod along when people talk, and the one underneath where I am still standing in that little fenced plot, watching footprints appear in snow that had been clean a moment before. I left the road crew last month. I told the county it was my back, which is not a lie. Exactly. It does hurt, but that is not why. Now I stock shelves at the hardware store near the highway. Aisles of paint cans and light bulbs and little brass door plates. And I avoid the section with floor safes and boxes of any kind. People come in and buy shovels, snow melt, wood for their own projects. And sometimes they talk about the new curve on County Road 14, how much safer it feels, how their kids do not slide there now. And I nod and say, that is good. And I think, you have no idea what is under your tires. Tonight, I did something I told myself I would not do. I got in my car after closing. Instead of turning right toward my apartment, I turned left, out onto the road that leads past the cemetery and the new barrier wall and the curve that feels different. It was already late, almost midnight. And the sky had that orange glow it gets when the clouds hang low and the town lights bounce up. And there was a thin skin of new snow on the ground. I told myself, I just wanted to prove something to myself, that I could drive by like a normal person, that the world was solid. But when I came up on the cemetery gate, I could not keep going. My hands turned the wheel almost on their own, and I eased onto the shoulder, let the car roll to a stop right by the iron bars. The engine light flickered again, that dull orange glow, and I turned the key off because I am stupid about batteries and idling, even when I am terrified. The silence when the engine died was so thick it felt like another presence in the car. I sat there with my hand still on the wheel, breath fogging the windshield, watching the faint shapes of stones on the hill and the darker bulk of that big maple tree. The gate was closed, chain looped through, but the lock was hanging open, like someone had unlatched it and not finished the job. I checked the time on my phone. 3:02. The date meant nothing to me, just another square to get through. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remember, eyes sunk in, skin gray, and underneath all of that, under the hum of my blood, there it was again, scratching. Not loud, not like in a movie, just this soft, steady sound from somewhere I could not pin down, like a small hand tracing patterns on a wooden lid, or nails dragging along the underside of the earth. It was not outside and it was not inside, it was just near. I told myself it was maybe an animal in the ditch, even though the snow was unbroken. I told myself all the things adults are supposed to tell themselves, and none of them helped. I do not know why I looked down at my own feet. Maybe because I felt this sudden cold around my ankles, like someone had opened a door, and I wanted to see if my boots were sitting in a draft. And through the thin layer of road dust and slush on the inner sill of the car door, I saw the shape of small toes pressed against the metal, like someone barefoot had stepped there from the inside, from under the floorboard, and left a perfect, dry, white print made of something like fine powder. It was there for a second, maybe two. Then, as I watched, it stretched, the toes elongating, the arch flattening, the whole thing becoming the size of a grown person's footprint, without any smearing, like the shape itself was being rewritten. Then it blew away, as if some breath had exhaled from under my seat and scattered it. That is why I'm talking now, why I am in this car in the dark telling you all of this, like a man in a confessional with no priest on the other side. I know I should turn the key, drive home, go to bed, pretend work and coffee and daylight are enough to keep whatever this is from following me, but I do not believe that anymore. I change routes to avoid cemeteries. I turn my radio up so I do not hear the sound of gravel under my tires. I avoid looking at dates on headstones in pictures. I cannot walk past the infant section of the floral display at the grocery store without my throat closing. I cannot remember entire hours of some days now. Like my life has little missing frames the way that video did. And I am scared that whatever stepped out of that coffin into the snow is walking through those blank spots. filling them in with something I will only see when it is too late. Maybe it was a child once. Maybe it was never finished, like that cruel little note said. Maybe it is just the shape of all the things people tried to put in the ground without facing them. I do not know. All I know is that a box we dug up from under the road was the wrong size, then the wrong weight, then the wrong everything. And when it got big enough, it broke itself open and left. And now I am sitting by a cemetery where the streetlights stop just short of the fence, listening to a sound that will not stop once it starts. And if you ever find yourself working near a burial ground, some old family plot they tell you is nothing, just a bit of history under your shovel, and you hit wood where no map says there should be any, and what you pull up feels too light in your hands and does not seem to stay the same when you look away. Do not do what we did. Do not bring it closer to town. Do not put it in a garage or a prep room. Do not give it time or space to remember how much of it there was supposed to be. Leave it there in the dark where it learned to be small, because once it starts growing, you will never be sure again what size anything is supposed to be, what weight anything is supposed to have, or whether the footprints you see in fresh snow outside your window in the middle of the night were there the last time you checked, or if they only began when you looked away. My name's Lucas Mercer. I'm from a little place called Stone Ridge outside Arkadelphia, Arkansas, and I work as a roadside diesel mechanic, the kind of guy folks only remember when their truck will not start and the clock is saying a time nobody wants to be awake for. I need you to listen to me for a bit, man. I swear to God I am not trying to scare you for fun or anything like that. I am sitting here in my car by the cemetery gate, and my battery light has been flirting with me the whole time, and I can see my own breath on the inside of the windshield, and my hands will not stop shaking. I had a sausage biscuit from the gas station this afternoon around 4. One of those that taste like the wrapper. And I spilled mustard on my gray work shirt. The one with Luke has stitched in red over my heart, and that stain is still there right now because I did not have the energy to change before I came out here. I clocked in yesterday at 5:30 in the evening. That is what the time clock said. And I remember thinking it was going to be an easy night because the sky was clear and the air felt dry and crisp. No storms, no fog, nothing that usually means trouble on the highway. Nights that look clean are the ones that lie to you. I was on call for the stretch of interstate that cuts past those 2 little rest stops out in the middle of nothing. The kind people only use when they are too tired or too desperate. And I had my service truck fueled, tools packed, air hose coiled, everything. The way I always do it. Because habit is the only thing that keeps you from making mistakes when you are half asleep under somebody's trailer at 3 in the morning. You need to know that my life before that night was boring in the best way. I went to work, I came home, I watched whatever game was on. I went to church on Sundays when I was not on shift. I called my mom once a week. I did not see things. I did not hear things. I slept. Now I am parked by a cemetery because I cannot drive past headstones without feeling like something is walking along the fence line with me. So, that night, I had my usual thermos of coffee. Cheap stuff, too strong because I never measure right. And the cab of the truck smelled like old beans and grease and that rubber smell from hose and belts. Dispatch radio stayed quiet for a while. I remember scrolling my phone in the lot behind the shop, watching one of those videos where a guy restores a rusty wrench, anything just to let my brain idle. Around midnight, the air started to feel different. Not colder exactly, just thinner, like breathing in a room where someone opened a door down the hall. I checked the weather app. Nothing special. Clear all night. At 12:17, I remember that exact number because I looked right at the screen. The radio crackled, and Cheryl from dispatch said, "Lucas, you up? We got a call from a trucker at the southbound rest stop past mile marker 139. He says his rig will not turn over, and he has got refrigerated freight. Can you roll?" I said sure, and I wrote the mile marker down on a little notepad I keep on the dash, even though I know that stretch by heart. I started the truck. The engine caught with that deep diesel rumble that settles into your bones, and I pulled out of the lot. I told myself it was just another call, easy money, jump start, and paperwork. The road out there at night is something different, man. The The streetlights drop off, and it is just your headlights and the white lines and that low hum of tires on concrete. There is this one stretch where the trees pull back and you can see stars if the sky is clear. And then it closes in again, pines and oaks crowding the edges like they are leaning in to listen. I had the radio low, some old country song I barely heard, and my coffee between my knees. I passed the sign for the rest area, blue and white, rest area 1 mile. And I felt that little pull in my chest I always get when I know I am about to pull in there. I never liked that place, even before any of this. It is small, just a loop off the interstate, a couple of vending machines, bathrooms that always smell like bleach, and something they never fully got out. A few picnic tables with those metal roofs over them, and a line of trees at the back where the lights do not quite reach. There is a chain link fence half swallowed by vines running along that tree line, and a little patch of ground beyond it that looks like a field when you are driving past. I pulled in at 12:43. I remember because I checked the time when I flicked my blinker on, more out of habit than anything. There were only 2 rigs parked there, one white refrigerated trailer with the company logo peeling off the side, and an older blue cab with no trailer, just sitting near the exit. The rest of the lot was empty, except for one old pickup down near the vending machines, no lights on, might have been abandoned for all I knew. The overhead lamps buzzed. That high sound you notice when everything else is quiet, and insects flickered in and out of the light. I parked behind the reefer unit, left my engine running because I was not planning to be long, grabbed my flashlight, and opened the door. The air hit me first. It should have been just cool night air, right? But it had this dry edge to it, like the wind you get before a storm, except there was no storm. The plastic flowers in those little holders by the pet walking area rattled even though the trees above them were barely moving. I told myself it was nothing, just the way wind moves in pockets. The trucker was standing by his cab when I walked up, arms folded, shoulders hunched against the cold. He was older than me, maybe 50s. Heavyset, wearing a faded ball cap with some minor league team on it. "You, Lucas," he said, and I nodded, holding up my clipboard. He told me the engine had just quit when he tried to leave. No warning, no noise, just dead. And I listened, asked the usual questions, tried to keep my eyes on the engine and not on the tree line I could feel at my back. I hooked up the jump box, checked his batteries, did the normal stuff. It was ordinary work, and my hands were steady while they were busy. It was when I stopped moving that things started to feel wrong. He asked me, "You ever hear anything weird out here?" And he tried to say it like a joke, but his eyes didn't match the tone. I said, "Like what? Coyotes?" And he shook his head and nodded toward the trees. I swear to God he said it like this, dead serious. Sometimes there is a guy pacing back there in the trees, like he is waiting on something. But I never see him come in or out. You ever had that, someone just already in a place with no way they got there? I laughed, or tried to. Said maybe he is just a walker from the highway. And the trucker said, wearing an old blue coat, like something out of history class. That is what he said. An old blue coat. I got his rig started around 1:15. The engine finally turned over with a cough, then a steady roar, and I wrote down the readings I needed, had him sign the work order. I was ready to leave. I should have left. As I turned to walk back to my truck, something caught my eye at the edge of the light. Back where the pavement stops and the gravel shoulder starts, there were boot prints. Not just any boots, either. The rest area had been dry all day. No rain, no mud puddles. The ground was firm, but there were wet prints leading from the gravel up toward the picnic tables, dark ovals where the dust looked soaked. The shape looked old-fashioned, narrower, toes a little different. I could see the tread edges sharp, like they had been put there a second ago. They didn't match my boots, and they didn't match the truckers. I checked, holding my foot next to one. They went right past us, almost brushing the side of my service truck, then cut over toward the trees at the back of the lot, stopping right at the fence. Just those steps stopping at chain link like whoever made them had walked into the fence and disappeared. I told myself somebody had spilled something. Coffee, maybe. But it did not smell like coffee. It smelled like creek water and iron. Listen, this is where my brain started fighting with itself. Part of me was saying, "You are tired. You are seeing patterns where there are none. Just get in the truck and go." Another part of me was counting the prints, one after another, and noticing how they spaced out like a man walking at a steady pace. The trucker saw me staring and said, "You see it too," and that made something drop in my stomach. He told me he had heard tapping on his cab before I arrived. 3 slow knocks on the door, like someone with all the time in the world. When he opened it, nobody was there, but after he got out, he noticed marks in the dust under his steps. He said that at 3 or 4 in the morning, on this stretch, he sometimes saw a man across the way in the trees, pacing back and forth just inside the darkness, not running, not stumbling, just walking like he was on patrol. When the trucker tried to get a better look, the man would be gone between one blink and the next. I told him it was probably some local, maybe security from somewhere, even though there is no building back there for miles. I just wanted to give us both an answer. On the way back to the shop, I could not shake it. The boot prints, the way they stopped at the fence, the way the air had seemed to pull toward the trees. I finished my shift, turned in the paperwork, and went home around 7:30 in the morning. I showered, I tried to wash the smell of diesel and cold air out of my clothes, and I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the window. I slept some, but it was not real sleep. Every time I drifted off, I saw the edge of that tree line and the empty space where a person should have been. A couple of days went by. I told myself it was just a weird night. Nothing more. Then Cheryl put me back on that stretch again. I did not complain. Work is work. Around 2 weeks after that first call, I was at a diner off the highway during a slow part of the shift, drinking bad coffee and eating eggs that tasted like the grill. There was an older man sitting a few stools down, gray beard, flannel shirt tucked into worn jeans, a stack of papers, and a big old book spread in front of him. The waitress called him Mr. Howard and asked if his history club had kicked him out yet. He laughed and started telling her about some local battle I had never heard of. Normally, I tune that stuff out, but when I heard him say the mile marker number, my ears perked up. He said, "That little rest area they just put in a few years back, that is about where a soldier fell trying to walk home after the war. Poor fool made it off the main road, but never got any farther than that tree line." I looked up. I felt my chest go tight. I asked him, "Sorry, sir, what did you say?" And he turned his papers toward me, pointed at a faded map with handwriting all over it. "There used to be a little family burial plot up there," he said, "back when this was all dirt roads and fields. And they laid some of the dead from a skirmish out there because the ground was soft and it was the quickest place. Some of those graves got moved when they put the highway in," he said, "but not all of them. I swear to God to you, man." When he said burial plot, the little hairs on my arm stood up. I asked him, quiet, if anybody ever talked about seeing a man there. He looked at me, like I had just told him something I should not know. He said, "You seen him?" And I tried to shrug, pretend it was just something somebody told me. But my voice cracked. He said, "They say sometimes a man walks the edge when it is late, wearing a coat from the wrong century, like he is still trying to find the road that is not there anymore." Mr. Howard flipped through his book and showed me a list of names, handwritten, and one of them had a little note next to it. Body unknown, presumed buried along southern tree line. After that, I started dreading the calls that took me out there. Not just the rest stop itself, but the slope of ground beyond it. I began to notice things I had not let myself notice before. The way the grass behind the fence stayed a different color, a little darker, even when the rest of the field went pale in the winter. The way the ground out past the tree line rose and fell, not like a natural hill, but like something underneath had shifted once and then settled. One night, off shift, I drove past there with my brother in the passenger seat. He had his earbuds in, watching something on his phone, and the truck was quiet except for the tires and the fan. As we passed the rest area going northbound, I glanced over and saw, clear as anything, a figure walking just at the edge of the light, between the last lamppost and the fence, wearing a long, dark blue coat that hung just past his knees. He was moving slow, steady, hands at his sides, head turned toward the highway like he was watching every car that went by. The coat was wrong for now, wrong for this place. The way it fit, the cut of it. By the time I said, "Did you see that guy?" my brother looked up and said, "See who?" And there was nobody there, just the battered trash cans and a plastic bag caught on the fence. You can say that is just tired eyes and a mind primed by a story. I tried to say that to myself. It worked until the night the knocks started. This was maybe 3 weeks after I first saw the prints. I got another call. Same southbound rest stop. Different truck this time. A guy with a flat battery on his reefer unit. It was around 3:10 in the morning when dispatch called. I remember because the digital clock on my dash flipped to 3:11 as I pulled onto the exit ramp. The sky was clear, stars sharp, but the air felt heavy, like the night was pressing down. I parked the service truck facing the trees this time. I do not know why. Maybe some part of me wanted to see if anything was there before turning my back. I climbed out, talked to the driver, started checking his unit. While I was working, I heard the sound of boots on the pavement behind me. That solid heel-toe sound. Not sneakers, not dress shoes, but something heavier, older. I figured it was the highway patrol. They come through sometimes and check on folks. So without turning around, I said, "Evening, officer. Got a downed unit here," just so they would not think I was messing around. Nobody answered. The footsteps stopped a few feet back. I straightened up slowly, feeling the muscles between my shoulders knot, and turned. There was nobody behind me. The lot was empty, except for the trucker, who was up in his cab looking at paperwork, and my truck. But on the side of my service truck, in the dust, there were smudges at about shoulder height, like someone with dirty hands had rested both palms there. The prints were too narrow for my hands and they were fresh, clearing 2 streaks through the dust that had built up over days. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself, "Someone brushed against it earlier, you just did not notice." I knelt back down to finish the job, hands shaking so much I dropped a wrench and it clanged louder than it should have in the quiet. That was when the knocking started on my truck. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the driver's side door, spaced out. Not the vibration of something settling, not a branch, but the sound of knuckles against metal, each one stronger than the last. The driver leaned out of his cab and called, "You got someone with you," and I just shook my head because my voice would not work. I stood up again, walked around the front of the reefer trailer toward where my truck was parked. The windshield was reflecting the overhead lamps, so all I could really see was my own shape moving closer. But the closer I got, the more I felt that someone else was standing on the other side, right up against the door, waiting. By the time I reached it, there was no one there, of course. The lot stretched out empty, the trees stood still, and the bathroom building hummed with the sound of fluorescent lights. But when I looked down, the ground was not empty. There were those same old-style boot prints in the thin layer of dust on the pavement, dark like they had just been pressed down with wet soles, right below the driver's side door. They faced my truck, toes pointed at the cab, and then they turned and walked away toward the back of the lot, one after another, leading straight to that chain-link fence at the tree line. Once again, no prints coming back. Nothing on the other side, just a line of steps ending at metal. I swear to God I almost left the truck running and just walked away. Instead, I did the stupid brave thing, or the stupid scared thing. I do not know which, and followed the trail. Each step felt like I was pushing against water. The air got cooler the closer I got to that fence. The trucker called something after me, but it sounded distant, like his voice had to travel farther than it should. The prints grew lighter near the edge, like whoever had made them was fading. But they were still there, lined up neat as anything, right against the chain link. I stopped about 2 feet away, on the other side of the fence. The ground dipped down into that dark patch of trees. From the highway, you would think it was just a little slope, but up close you could see the shapes in the ground, small rises and dips in a rough line, like lumps under a blanket. Old stones, broken, some leaning, some just stubs sticking up out of the dirt poking through the weeds. It clicked in my head, what Mr. Howard had said, the family plot. Some of the graves moved, and some not. They had just put a fence between the living and the dead and called it good. My flashlight caught on something ahead, a stone taller than the others, maybe waist high, thicker, with a rounded top. It was set a little apart from the rest, closer to the fence, like whoever put it there wanted it to be seen. The face of the stone was rough, the lettering worn down, but I could make out the shape of a carved star at the top, and the faint lines of a name, too rubbed away to read. And a year that started with 18. The dirt around its base looked wrong. The rest of the ground was packed and covered in old grass and leaves, but right there at the foot of that stone, the earth looked loose, darker, clumped like it had been turned recently. No shovel marks. No footprints. No footprints. Just the look of soil that has been disturbed and then settled again. Like a mound that had been opened and closed. I stood there, gripping the fence with one hand, my knuckles white, and I felt this sinking feeling, like my brain was stepping down into a place it should not go. I do not know how long I stared at that stone before I felt someone standing behind me, not physically touching, not breathing on my neck, but filling the space, taking up the cold. My skin prickled from the back of my neck all the way down my spine. I turned slowly, because I knew if I spun around too fast, I might collapse. At first, all I saw was the glaring white of the lamp above the parking lot, the empty pavement, my service truck with its cab light still on. Then my eyes adjusted and I saw him. He was standing between my truck and the picnic area, just at the edge where the light thins out. Not glowing, not see-through, nothing like that. He looked solid as any man I have worked next to. He wore a long coat that hung open, dark blue, almost black under the sodium lights, with dull brass buttons down the front. The coat was worn, edges frayed, stained in places with something that had dried a long time ago. Under it, I could see a shirt that looked too thin for a night this cold. His hair was dark and cut short, his face narrow and pale. Not pale like sick, pale like someone who had walked a long road under many suns and moons. His eyes were fixed on the highway, not on me, watching the spaces between the cars more than the cars themselves, like he was looking for something that should be there and was not. I tried to call out to the trucker in the cab, say. The man in the coat turned his head then, slowly, not surprised, not jerky, just like he had known I was there the whole time and had finally decided to acknowledge it. When his eyes met mine, I felt something slide inside my chest. It was not hatred or anger. That would have been easier. It was this long, patient, tired kind of wanting. Not even for me specifically, just for something he had been reaching for longer than I have been alive. His lips moved. No sound came out, but I could see the words so clearly, it was like they were inside my own head. Help me get home. I know what that sounds like. A trick of the light, tired mind, old stories, mixing with late-night nerves. I tried to tell myself that even in the moment, but while I was standing there, clinging to that cold metal fence, I could see his mouth form each word, slow and careful, as if it had been a very long time since he had spoken them. Help me get home, not yelled, not begged. A fact, a request, a command, all at once. When I did not move, when I stood frozen, his expression changed, just slightly. His brow creased. The smallest frown. Not angry, more like sad disappointment. He looked away from me, back toward the highway, then toward the dark beyond the tree line, where the old road might have been before they carved the interstate through. For a second, I saw him as if he were standing on dirt ruts instead of concrete, the shadow of invisible trees that were not there anymore flickering over his shoulders. The air between us tightened. The lights above the rest area hummed louder, then flickered. Not all at once, but in a rippling line, like something had passed under them. I do not remember deciding to move, but suddenly I was stumbling backward toward my truck, my boots slipping on the smooth pavement. My hand scraped the metal of the toolbox hard enough to peel skin, but I hardly felt it. I yanked the driver's side door open and threw myself in, slamming it shut, locking it without even thinking why that would matter if he was what he seemed. My breath came in sharp gasps and fogged up the inside of the windshield. I fumbled for the ignition, even though the engine was already running. That is how scrambled my head was. When I finally forced myself to look up, he was standing closer, not right at the hood, but closer than before. His lips moved again. I could not hear anything, but in my mind, clear as someone whispering in the seat next to me, I heard the words repeated, "Help me get home." Only this time, the word home felt wrong, not like a house or a town, like ground, like the place where you were supposed to stop walking and lie down. Something inside me broke then. Not that brave, stubborn part that jumps batteries in the rain. Something deeper. Some wire that says the world works according to rules and you can trust the road under your feet. I threw the truck into drive, tires squealing louder than they should on dry pavement, and pulled away. As I turned onto the exit lane back to the interstate, my headlights swept across the fence and the trees. For just a second, in that bright wash, I saw the stone again. The earth at its base looked higher than before, like a mound that had been filled in, smoothed by invisible hands. The little rises and dips in the ground around it seemed more pronounced, forming rows. I did not wait to see more. I merged onto the highway and drove faster than I should have in a work vehicle, hands clamped tight on the wheel, eyes fixed straight ahead. In the rear-view mirror, the rest area lights shrank away, but the feeling did not. It sat in the cab with me, heavy and silent. I did not tell anyone at the shop the full story, not at first. I told Cheryl I had a weird vibe out there, that maybe the lighting needed checking, that kind of thing. I told myself that if I talked about it out loud, it would become more real. Instead, it followed me in quieter ways. The next time they tried to schedule me on that stretch, I found a reason to switch with another guy. Said my truck needed maintenance. Lied about a noise in the transmission. Then I started changing my route home even when I was off shift, taking the long way around just so I would not have to see that blue sign for the rest area or catch a glimpse of the tree line. At church, when we sang the hymn about soldiers and battles, my throat closed. At the hardware store, I walked past a display of little American flags and had to leave because the sight of them in rows, cloth barely moving in the air conditioning, made my hands sweat. I would be sitting on my couch and an image would just drop into my mind. That coat, those boots, the way his eyes looked through me and past me at the same time. I started sleeping with the TV on just for noise. Did not help much. One afternoon, my brother came by and asked why I would not take the shorter route into town anymore. I tried to brush it off. Said I did not like the traffic. He laughed and said, "You never used to care, man. What changed?" I snapped at him, harder than he deserved. Told him to mind his own business. Later, I apologized. Said I was just tired. But the truth is, I did not know how to explain that a stretch of road and a little rest stop had become a wound in the map for me, a place I could not look at without feeling something walking alongside me, just outside the corner of my eye. It did not stop at roads and rest areas. It spread. A couple of months after that night, my cousin asked me to ride with him to a funeral over in another county. Before all this, I would have gone, no question, to support family. Stand there in my best shirt, bow my head, do the decent thing. This time, I told him I had a double shift and could not make it. That was not true. I sat at home that day, pacing from room to room. Every time I thought about standing between rows of headstones, my lungs felt like they were full of cold water. I have not been to a funeral since. I send flowers. I send messages. I do not go. Driving became strange too. Anytime I passed a cemetery, even a small churchyard tucked behind a building, I realized I was speeding up, hands tightening on the wheel, eyes fixed straight ahead. If I saw headstones out of the corner of my vision, I refused to look directly, like a child scared to see something staring back. Once, late in the day, I got stuck at a red light next to a hillside cemetery I had probably driven by 100 times without noticing. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the graves, and a dry wind was blowing, making the little plastic pinwheels and flowers rattle against their stems. I turned the radio up so loud my speakers crackled, just to drown out that sound in my head, the memory of boots on pavement and knuckles on metal. You might be thinking, why not move? Why not get a different job? Why keep driving if the road itself feels haunted now? I ask myself that too. The truth is, I do not know how to be anything other than what I am. It is the one thing I have always been good at. But I changed my shifts. I told the boss I preferred days, blamed my age, said the night work was messing with my body clock. He was surprised, said, I thought you liked nights. Less traffic, better pay. I mumbled something about health and kept my eyes on the floor. He let me switch, eventually. Now I am mostly out when the sun is up. That man walked in the early morning hours when it was quiet, but I feel him all day now, in the reflection of glass doors, in the way certain shadows fall across the road. I do not see him full on anymore. Not like that night. Instead, I get flashes. I was in a truck stop parking lot about an hour from there the other week. Bright sunlight. Lot packed with vehicles. Music playing from someone's cab. Just normal. I dropped a socket and bent to pick it up, and as I straightened, for half a heartbeat, I saw a pair of boots step past the gap under the trailer on the other side. Boots with that same old-fashioned shape. When I looked again, it was just dust and sunlight. Another time, I stopped at a smaller rest area on a different highway, went into the bathroom, and when I came back out, my service truck had 2 streaks wiped clean through the dust on the hood, the exact width of hands. No prints on the ground, no kids running around, nobody near. My stomach flipped. I drove away without even using the vending machine. That is why I am here now, man. Why I am parked outside this little cemetery on the edge of town at 3 in the morning. My engine off so I can hear every sound. My phone propped up on the dash, with the screen cracked in the corner from where a wrench slipped out of my hand last month and landed on it. I thought, maybe if I say it out loud, if I lay it all out like this, I can pin it down, make it smaller, make it into something that fits inside words, instead of something that follows me in the spaces between rest stops and graveyards. But talking about it just makes me realize how much of my life now is built around not walking past places like this. I take the long way. I sit in parking lots facing away from any kind of stone or fence. I will not park by a tree line if I can help it. When a customer mentions being near a memorial park or a veteran cemetery, I feel my grip tighten on the phone. I check maps before I go anywhere new. Not for traffic, not for gas prices, but to see if there are clusters of headstones near the road. I change my route if there are. I know you are probably wondering, why did he say those words? Why you? Why that night? I do not have an answer. Maybe I was just the one who happened to be standing there when whatever thin wall between his time and mine stretched too far. Maybe he has been pacing that tree line since before my great-grandparents were born, knocking on whatever passes close enough. Cabs of trucks, doors of cars, the thin metal skin between him and the people who still get to drive away. Home for him could be a farmhouse that is not standing anymore, a town that no longer exists, a road that is buried under asphalt, or it could simply be the place he fell, the patch of ground where someone dropped his body and then forgot, and where the dirt got moved around again when a state project decided to put in a rest stop. Maybe every time a truck pulls in and a man gets out and stretches his legs, there is a moment where those two things touch, the need to stop moving and the need to. I cannot fix it. I fix alternators, batteries, starter motors, busted airlines. I cannot fix a grave that feels wrong 20 steps past a fence they put up. As a kind of apology, the highway authorities are not going to listen if I call and say, "Hey, I think you built over something you should not have." Howard, with his maps and old books, he would probably nod sadly and say, "That is what happens. Time moves on. The dead stay put." Only I do not think that one stayed put. Not all the way. I think a part of him is still walking that edge. In a coat that never changes. Boots that never wear out. Leaving prints in dust and wet patches that do not line up with the weather reports. And I think he noticed me, noticing him. And that is a kind of invitation you cannot take back. So now, every time I pass even the smallest patch of ground with a stone on it, I feel my shoulders tense, waiting for a knock that may never come, or may come from inside my own head. I turn the radio up when I drive by bigger cemeteries because I cannot stand the idea that if I turned it off I might hear boots fall in time with my tires. When people talk about taking shortcuts through graveyards, I leave the room. When my family mentions visiting a grave, I change the subject. I tell myself that there are no soldiers in old coats following me, that I am just a man who got scared once and never got fully unscared. Then I wash my truck and see, every now and then, streaks in the dust, as if hands I cannot see had rested there while the water dried. I am not asking you to fix it for me. I know you cannot. I am just telling you, as plain as I can, that if you are out late somewhere, at a little rest stop on a long stretch of highway, and you see boot prints where they should not be, or you hear knocking on your cab when there is no one there, or you catch a glimpse of a coat in the wrong color for this century moving along the tree line, maybe do not follow it to the fence. Maybe do not grip the metal and lean in to see if the dirt looks fresh. Because once you see that the ground can change without anyone touching it, once you see that a grave that should be settled can look like something climbed out, it does not leave you. You will start avoiding places meant for the dead the way I do. Taking the long way. Parking where the stones are not in view. Turning up the volume whenever you pass. Even a hint of a cemetery, and you will find yourself, one night, sitting in a car that needs a new battery by a cemetery gate, telling some stranger you never met about a man in an old blue coat who just wanted to get home, and about how you drove away and left him pacing that line between the trees and the lights. You will swear to God you can still feel eyes on you every time the road curves past a place where the names on the stones have worn off. And you will realize that you are not really afraid of the dead. You are afraid of the ones who are not done walking yet,